My grandson David experienced his first winter this year. The weather report said it was a record cold day, and I couldn't help but worry about David and his mother, Yvonne. I hoped they hadn't gotten sick from the cold. That night, I sent Yvonne a message on my smartphone asking, "Are you and the baby okay? Not catching a cold?" But even though I sent it 2 or 3 times, there was no reply, not even a read receipt. She's always been so responsible, so I hoped she wasn't overdoing it. After waiting another hour, I tried calling, but there was no answer. Worried something serious had happened, I quickly put on my thick jumper and rushed out to drive to my son's family apartment. There was no response when I rang the intercom, and fearing the worst, that Yvonne had collapsed inside, I had the building manager open the door. The apartment was dark, with only light from the street lamps seeping in. Groping along the wall, I searched for the light switch. I fumbled for it several times, but the lights wouldn't turn on. "What's going on here?" I thought, feeling a mix of anxiety and irritation. With no other option, I used my smartphone's flashlight to look around. "Yvonne, are you there? Could they be out?" Just as I was about to leave, I thought I heard a baby's cry from the bedroom. "Yvonne, are you there?" I quickly headed to the bedroom. There, I found Yvonne shivering from the cold but desperately wrapping newborn David in a sheet to keep him warm. What happened? To my shock, Yvonne's once long and proud black hair was now chopped off, almost completely shaved. "This is terrible. What happened here?" "My name is Mary Smith. I'm 61 years old. I've worked as a hairstylist for many years, running a salon out of my home. Chatting casually with my regulars during their appointments has always been the highlight of my day. The salon was originally started by my husband and me. However, he passed away from cancer when he was young, not long after our son Harry was born. Despite the challenges, I raised Harry on my own, but Harry didn't make it easy. He often skipped school and got into trouble when he did attend. After graduating high school, he didn't continue his education, instead spent his days hanging out in town. I often wondered if he felt inferior because he didn't have a father around or if I wasn't a good enough mother. I always worried about Harry's future but never found an answer. So when Harry suddenly said one day, "I want to be a hairstylist," I was so surprised I pinched my cheek, thinking I was dreaming. "What's gotten into you?" I asked. "Hairstylists are popular with the ladies, right?" Harry replied with a smirk. "I guess kids do grow up watching their parents, huh?" Regardless of the reason, I decided to take a positive view of my son showing interest in his future for the first time. Harry successfully graduated from cosmetology school and started working as an apprentice at a senior salon. That's where he met Yvonne, who would later become his wife. Harry was smitten with her at first sight, and after a strong pursuit, he announced to me with a confident smile, "I've decided to marry this girl," introducing me to Yvonne. "Nice to meet you. I'm Yvonne. You are a hairstylist too, right? I look forward to learning from you." Yvonne, with her long black hair and bright smile, was a wonderful woman. "I look forward to that," I replied, instantly liking her. A year after their marriage, Harry expressed his desire to start his own salon. Though he hadn't been an apprentice for long, he seemed to have gained a lot of confidence as a hairstylist. "I want to have my own place and prove my skills." Honestly, I was a bit worried. I knew from my experience that it's not easy for a newcomer to make it on their own in this industry, but I couldn't ignore the earnest look in Harry's eyes as he talked about his dream. "How much do you have saved up?" I asked. He showed me his bank book with a troubled look and a sigh. Despite having a steady income, he was spending just as much as he earned. With this pattern, he was far from having enough to start his own business. Harry had been squandering most of his earnings on leisure. Perhaps I should have advised him to give up then, but I smiled and said, "Don't worry about the money." Indulging him was maybe my way of making up for the loneliness he felt growing up without a father. Truth be told, I hadn't touched the life insurance money left by my late husband. "It's for Harry. You forgive me, right?" I whispered to my husband's portrait. One of my regulars was knowledgeable in real estate, so I consulted with her. "That place would be perfect," she said. It was a property that had been used as a barber shop until half a year ago, but the owner had retired due to old age. The location wasn't bad, and she thought it might be just right for Harry's new start. During the renovation, one of my regulars said, "Use my husband. He just lazes around the house on his days off anyway." Another chimed in, "My son's studying architecture in college and is home for the summer break. He can help out too, get some hands-on experience." Thanks to their help, the construction went smoothly. Once we got the health department's approval, the salon opened in no time. I never imagined I could set up my own business so quickly. You should thank everyone. It's not something you could have done alone. I know. I'm grateful to you, Mom, Harry said. Then I handed Harry the bank book containing the remainder of his father's inheritance. The purchase and renovation costs were lower than expected, so there was still more than half left. This is a gift from your father to you. Use it wisely for business expenses and don't you dare waste it. Yeah, I'm not a kid. I get it, Harry said, chuckling in annoyance. Don't worry, I'll keep a close eye on Harry to make sure he doesn't spend the money foolishly, Yvonne said with a bright smile. Her words made me laugh. With Yvonne's help, I didn't need to worry about interfering any further. I optimistically decided to watch over their business from a distance. But soon, I realized my optimism was misplaced. Yvonne occasionally visited my salon to update me on their progress, and each time her expression grew more somber. 3 months after Harry's salon opened, she confided, "Harry's not putting his heart into the work." What? Harry, why? He was so enthusiastic at first. Sure, he thought his skills would bring in customers, but within a month, he stopped smiling and began treating customers coldly. As a result, our reputation has plummeted and customers have stopped coming. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Harry had wanted his own salon so badly. What had changed in such a short time? Harry thought that being a good hairstylist was all it took, but running a salon is more than that. Yvonne sighed. She was right. Business doesn't work on the quality of your work alone. Customer service plays a huge role in success. It seemed Harry was missing that fundamental understanding. So, what's Harry doing now? I asked. He's frustrated about the lack of customers and spends his days drinking. If he doesn't get his act together, we'll lose even more clients. Right now, I'm handling the customers we do have. But if our reputation keeps dropping, the business will only get worse, Yvonne explained, looking like she was on the verge of tears. I felt the same way. All right, I'll have a serious talk with him next time I see him. Thank you so much, Yvonne said, bowing deeply before brushing back her long black hair. Your hair is always so stunning, I commented, trying to lighten the mood. I started growing it out in middle school, she said proudly. Being that long, any particular reason? Are you familiar with hair donation? Yvonne looked at me earnestly. Hair donation? I think I heard about it at a hairstylist's meeting, but I don't know much about it. Yvonne's eyes sparkled as she explained, it's about making wigs from real hair for children who've lost their hair due to congenital diseases, illness, or accidents. I've been growing my hair to donate to organizations involved in this. Isn't it wonderful to be able to help someone? I read an article about an actress who was doing it and thought maybe I could do that too. Wow, that's really admirable, especially for someone as young as you, I said, overwhelmed by Yvonne's passion. 6 months into her marriage with Harry, Yvonne got pregnant. She's always been so conscientious, always pushing herself too hard. When I'm not looking, Yvonne, this is the most crucial time. You really shouldn't overdo it, I repeatedly warned her. She'd just lightly laugh and say, don't worry, I'm taking it easy, consulting with the baby in my belly. But in reality, Yvonne worked at the salon right up until the last month of her pregnancy, supporting the family while Harry's attitude worsened. Every time Yvonne updated me, I felt my own shortcomings as a mother. One day, I finished work early and decided to check on their salon. I ran into Harry just as he was about to leave. Where are you going? Out for a drink. There won't be any more customers today anyway, he said nonchalantly, laughing off the situation. The lack of customers had become normal for Harry, and he wasn't even trying to improve things anymore. You're about to become a father, you know. Harry just waved his hand dismissively and hopped on his motorcycle. We're not done talking. Think about Yvonne for once. Yeah, I'll do that when I feel like it. He laughed and sped off. Inside the salon, Yvonne was cleaning the floor. Today we managed to get just one customer, she said, smiling brightly despite looking exhausted. Are you eating properly? You need to get enough nutrition. Don't worry about me. It's not just about you, it's for the baby, I said sternly, making sure she understood the gravity of the situation. Yvonne teared up a bit and thanked me. At times like this, a father should be there to support her. I wanted to shout at Harry, who was nowhere to be found. Yvonne told me the salon wasn't doing well and that Harry was spending money recklessly every night. Giving that babe book to Harry was a mistake. I regretted my decision. Despite being busy, Yvonne never neglected her hair care. Gently stroking her belly, she said, "I want to teach my child the joy of helping others." That's when I realized I wanted to support her since my son wasn't of much help. I decided to assist Yvonne at their apartment. "I'm always sorry to trouble you." "Don't worry about it. Just focus on the baby," she replied. It was my fault for not raising my son right. Because of that, Yvonne was suffering. Perhaps it was my way of atoning for my sins. At least at the end of summer, Yvonne went into labor earlier than expected and was rushed to the hospital. Harry was nowhere to be found, unreachable. I kept sending him messages, but there were no replies, not even read receipts. What on earth is he doing at a time like this? Yvonne's parents had passed away, so I was the only one who could be there for her. "Don't worry, Yvonne, I'm here," I kept encouraging her as she bravely faced childbirth. After a long and difficult labor, I was overwhelmed by the sound of the baby's cries. "He's born? You did it, Yvonne," I said, moved to tears. But Harry, who should have been there, never showed up. My grandson David was experiencing his first winter. The weather report said it was a record cold day. No wonder it was so chilly that I had trouble getting out of bed. My first thoughts were of Yvonne and newborn David. I hoped they weren't affected by the cold. Worried, I sent a message to Yvonne that night. "Are you and the baby okay? Haven't caught a cold?" But even after sending 2 or 3 messages, there was no response, not even a read receipt. I was concerned that Yvonne might be too ill to move. She's always been so responsible. I hope she's not overdoing it. After waiting another hour, I tried calling again, but the result was the same. Something's not right. Without a second thought, I put on my thick jumper and rushed out to their apartment. When I arrived, the place was engulfed in darkness. It's not uncommon for families to travel abroad during the holidays, but I hadn't heard anything about a trip from Yvonne and Harry, and they likely couldn't afford it anyway. I rang the intercom, but there was no response, fearing Yvonne might have collapsed. I immediately asked the building manager to open the door. "I'll wait outside. Please let me know if there's anything," I told the manager before stepping inside. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. I remembered the light switch was right by the entrance. Relying on my memory, I groped for the light switch on the wall. But no matter how many times I flipped it on and off, the lights didn't respond at all. What's going on here? I thought, feeling a mixture of anxiety and irritation. With no other option, I used my smartphone's flashlight to illuminate the room as I stepped inside. "Yvonne, are you here?" I called out in the living room, but there was no answer. Maybe they had just gone out. Just as I was about to leave, I thought I heard a faint cry of a baby from the bedroom. "Yvonne, are you in there?" I quickly headed toward the sound. There was Yvonne, shivering from the cold, desperately wrapping newborn David in a sheet to keep him warm. What happened here? When I shone the light on her, I was shocked to see that her once long, proud black hair had been roughly cut off, almost to the scalp. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, looked at me helplessly. "This is terrible. How did this happen?" I took off my jumper and draped it over Yvonne. "It's okay now. Just tell me what happened as much as you can." Yvonne began to speak slowly. She said that Harry had continued his daily escapades even after David was born. Eventually, they couldn't pay the electric bill anymore, and Yvonne, unable to bear it any longer, Yvonne scolded Harry. She had just wanted him to be more responsible as a father, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. In a fit of rage, Harry grabbed a pair of practice hair-cutting scissors and started cutting off Yvonne's hair. At first, Yvonne tried to resist, saying, "Stop it," but fearing any further resistance might accidentally harm David, she stopped resisting. Harry laughed mockingly, saying, "Now you won't be able to show your face in public." I was speechless at my son's cruel actions. "Why didn't you tell me it had gotten this bad?" I asked. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry," Yvonne apologized, blaming herself again. "No, Yvonne, it's not your fault. You're not the one to blame here. It's Harry. You did nothing wrong." I knew Yvonne hadn't confided in me because she didn't want to worry me. I hugged her tightly, tears streaming down my face. The whole situation was a result of my overindulgence in raising Harry. My heart burned with shame and anger at my own failings and my son's inability to empathize with others. Taking a deep breath, I called Harry. "Hey, Mom, long time no talk. What's up?" he answered, calling all of a sudden. Just wanted to hear your voice. How's everything over there? Are Yvonne and David doing okay? Of course, everyone's fine and doing well. I've been calling home, but no one's picking up. Where are you now? There was a brief pause in his voice, as if he was concocting an excuse. Actually, we're a family of 3 in Hawaii. We'll be back next week. Hawaii, huh? That sounds nice, I responded, though I knew he was blatantly lying to me. What had I been doing all these years, taking care of Harry after losing my husband at a young age? I worked non-stop as a hairstylist. It was all to raise Harry into a respectable person. When he expressed a desire to become an independent hairstylist, I fulfilled his wish without hesitation. Yet Harry carelessly squandered the inheritance his father left, using it for his own pleasures and even mistreating his wife and child. My expectations for Harry turned into profound disappointment. What would you like as a souvenir? I'll bring you something nice, Harry asked. Anything's fine. You're coming back next week, right? Safe and sound, I replied. Hey, Mom, you sound a bit off. Is something wrong? Harry seemed to sense something, but I ended the call without responding. I informed the building manager waiting outside of my plans and decided to take Yvonne and David back to my house. Then I started making calls to every place I could think of. A week later, Harry called me cheerfully, announcing that he had just landed at the airport. I'm back, Mom, and I've got souvenirs for you, he said, pretending to be the caring son. But my heart was no longer deceived by his act. That's nice to hear, I replied in a flat tone, though Harry didn't seem to notice anything unusual. About an hour later, a taxi pulled up in front of the apartment. Harry, clearly having enjoyed his solo trip to Hawaii with distinct tan lines from sunglasses around his eyes, unloaded a bunch of luggage from the trunk. He took out his keys, expecting to enter the apartment. Where his wife and son should be waiting, he must have thought that once he inserted and turned the key, the door would open immediately. However, no matter how many times he tried, the key wouldn't fit the lock. What's going on here? He exclaimed in frustration. I approached him quietly from behind and asked with a smile, Did you enjoy your trip to Hawaii? Though my heart was boiling with anger. Mom, you're here, Harry said, relieved to see me, misunderstanding the situation. Listen, Mom, I just got back and tried to enter the house, but the key won't fit. It must be Yvonne's prank. Punishing me for going on a trip alone, he tried to paint himself as the victim, blaming Yvonne, leaving Yvonne, who just gave birth, and newborn David behind. What were you doing? I told you I was in Hawaii with my family, Harry protested, suddenly panicking. Didn't you just say you went on the trip alone? I pointed out the contradiction. Harry was at a loss for words. You really had the nerve to lie about taking a family trip to Hawaii. Yvonne was here with the electricity cut off, shivering in the cold, holding David close to protect him, and to think she cherished her long hair, and you just cut it off mercilessly. Don't you feel any remorse as a human being? I guess I messed up there, but right now I just want to get inside the house. It's freezing in Japan, Harry replied, rubbing his arms theatrically, showing no sign of remorse. The cold Yvonne and David endured is nothing compared to this. Plus, you no longer have a home here. I've already canceled the lease on the apartment. It's time you find your own place to live, I stated firmly. Cancel the lease. What? Why would you do something like that without asking me? Harry protested, suddenly panicking. But the apartment was leased under my name after all. I couldn't just stand outside and continue this conversation, so I took Harry to a nearby coffee shop to talk further. Harry sipped his coffee silently, probably not even tasting it. He kept glancing between me and his coffee with a pale face. You were so strapped for cash that you couldn't pay the electric bill. Did you manage to go to Hawaii? I said, watching Harry grimace. Finally, he began to spill his selfish reasoning. He admitted that right from the start of his business, he was showing off to friends and women he picked up at the salon, spending his father's inheritance on his antics. He knew such spending would quickly deplete any fortune, but after getting a taste of the power of money, he continued his lavish lifestyle even after the inheritance ran out, racking up debts to buy gifts and take trips. You're quite the big spender, aren't you, especially for a failing business? I remarked. Don't worry, I'm a professional hairstylist. Once I get serious clients, they will come flooding in and I'll be able to support my family, Harry replied with unfounded confidence. I looked at him coldly. Your salon? I've already sold it, all the equipment too. It's too late to get anything back. I shattered his baseless confidence. That's a lie. Why would you do something like that? Harry's face turned red as he slammed his hand on the table. Oh, you were planning to continue with the salon? I thought you had abandoned it since you left everything to Yvonne. Besides, I bought the building and land in my name. You have no right to complain now, I retorted. But I was just trying to attract customers. I had it all planned out. Harry's eyes looked like those of a child about to burst into tears. If you're so confident in your skills, you should be able to start over from scratch, I said coldly, then left the coffee shop after placing money for the coffee on the table. A month passed, Yvonne and I avoided any contact with Harry. But unpleasant rumors inevitably reached my ears after I pushed him away. Harry apparently ran to his friends begging for money, but they were the kind who gathered around him for his money. Naturally, nobody was willing to help a financially drained Harry. He even got reported to the police for stalking some of the women he picked up at his salon. Although he only received a stern warning from the police, the lack of support from his acquaintances hit him hard, and he completely disappeared from our lives. He's probably living alone now in fear of harsh debt collectors. All this is the consequence of his own actions. My anger towards Harry isn't just about his reckless spending. What's unforgivable is how he neglected Yvonne and David, pushing them into hardship, and above all, cutting off Yvonne's long hair, which she had grown out for years for a noble cause, thereby potentially robbing unknown children of a brighter future. As a fellow hairstylist, I could never forgive Harry's actions. It will take a long time for Harry to truly understand the emotional pain Yvonne has endured. Yvonne herself never speaks of her hurt, but it's clear she's not unscathed. She appears to be keeping her feelings bottled up, probably not wanting to worry me. Wanting to do something to help, I reached out to my hairstylist friends and had a special wig made for Yvonne. It won't make up for my son's wrongs, but please use this, I said. Thank you, Mom, Yvonne said with a smile, though tears were streaming down her cheeks. Using my aching back as an excuse, I asked Yvonne to help out at the salon. She threw herself into the work, seemingly trying to forget her emotional scars. Hello, David, a regular greeted, and David in his cradle burst into giggles. Now some customers even come to the salon just to see him. He's like a little mascot, a baby that brings in good fortune. Yvonne, regaining her strength both physically and emotionally, has started the process of divorcing Harry. Seeing Yvonne's smile makes us all feel like we've shed 20 years, but it's true. Yvonne and David have brightened up the salon considerably. Attracted by Yvonne's cheerful atmosphere, more and more mothers with young children have become regulars. Let's have a great day today. Hi, how are you? Now the salon is filled with smiles again. In a quiet corner, David is peacefully sleeping, his cute little snores filling the air.
Look, it's not like Mark and I had fireworks or anything when we met. We just clicked, you know? We were two people who found out we fit well together, and that was that. Love came later, like a surprise guest at a party you didn't know you were throwing. I'm Emily, by the way. Emily Johnson. Well, now it's Patterson since I married Mark. Mark's a great guy, steady and kind. But his family? That's a whole other story. His dad, Mr. Patterson, he's all right. A quiet man who loves his garden more than anything. But his mom, Mrs. Patterson, and I, we just never hit it off. Then there's Linda, married to Mark's older brother Dave. She's the perfect daughter-in-law, always agreeing with Mrs. Patterson, always a step ahead in pleasing her. It's like she's playing a role in some drama where she's the star, and Mrs. Patterson is the adoring audience. So one day, we're all at their place for dinner. Mark and I, Dave and Linda, and the Pattersons, of course. Mrs. Patterson's going on and on about their new house. You know, the one they got with a huge mortgage? She's like a broken record, always comparing it to our small apartment. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. You really should think about upgrading, Emily. Living in such a cramped space, it's just sad. I tried to keep my cool. We're happy with what we have, Mrs. Patterson. It's cozy. Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Oh, but just imagine having a place like this. You must be so envious. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to let it go. I bit my tongue and forced a smile. Yeah, Linda, maybe one day, I said, keeping my voice light. Mr. Patterson, trying to change the subject, asked Mark about his work. I was grateful for the distraction. Mark talked about his latest project, and for a moment, we all fell into a more comfortable conversation. But Mrs. Patterson couldn't help herself. Well, it's good you're keeping busy, Mark. But with Emily not working, I do wonder how you manage. It must be tough. I felt my face flush. Actually, I've been thinking about starting my own business, I said, more to stand my ground than anything else. Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow. A business? What can you possibly do? Before I could answer, Linda laughed. Oh, let's not bore ourselves with fantasies. More wine, anyone? The evening dragged on, filled with more jabs and thinly veiled insults. By the time Mark and I got back to our apartment, I was fuming. Mark tried to calm me down. Hey, just ignore them. We know what we have, and that's all that matters. I nodded, but inside, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being looked down upon, of being the underdog in a family that thrived on appearances and material wealth. Little did I know, things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. Life's funny, you know? One minute you're thinking you've got it all figured out, and the next, you're wondering how you got stuck in this sitcom of a family drama. That's how it felt every time we visited Mark's parents. Their new house was like a trophy, big, shiny, and always on display. I remember this one Saturday. Mark and I were at our place, enjoying our usual lazy morning routine, when he got a call from his dad, asking if we could come over. I knew what that meant. Another round of show off the house and make Emily feel small. We got there, and Mrs. Patterson was in full hostess mode, guiding us through rooms we'd seen a dozen times already. And here's the new coffee table we got. Italian marble, you know. It's quite expensive, but you get what you pay for. Mark, bless him, always tried to be diplomatic. Looks great, Mom. Really ties the room together. I just nodded along. What else could I do? Then came the inevitable comparison. I just can't imagine how you two manage in that tiny apartment of yours. It must feel so cramped, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice all sugary concern. I felt my patience wearing thin. It's not that bad, Mrs. Patterson. We like it. She tisked, shaking her head. But you deserve better, Emily. A woman should have a proper home, not some shoebox. Before I could bite back a retort, Mark's dad, Mr. Patterson, called out from the kitchen. Anyone wants a beer? I'll help you, Dad, Mark said quickly, giving me a look that said, please, no drama. I was left alone with Mrs. Patterson and Linda. Linda, ever the eager sidekick, piped up. You know, Emily, there's a certain charm to living minimally, but of course, it's not for everyone. Some of us prefer comfort. Exactly, Linda. Comfort and style, Mrs. Patterson added, glancing around her lavish living room. I forced a smile. Well, everyone has their own taste, right? We're happy with what we have. Mrs. Patterson sniffed. Of course, dear. Happiness is all relative after all. The rest of the visit was more of the same subtle digs and not so subtle boasts. By the time we left, I was mentally exhausted. On the drive back, Mark tried to lighten the mood. Hey, don't let them get to you. You know how they are. I sighed, staring out the window. I know, it's just... It feels like it's never going to end, you know? Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. We'll get through it. We always do. But as we drove back to our shoebox, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of frustration. Why did it always have to be a competition with them? Why couldn't they just be happy for us as we were? Life's like a roller coaster, they say. You never see the twist coming. That week was one such twist for me. I got a call from my mom, telling me that Grandpa had passed away. I was heartbroken, of course. He was always kind to me, a bit of a silent supporter in my corner. The shock came when we found out he left me a pretty hefty sum, $500,000. I couldn't believe it. Mark was happy for me, in his quiet way. That's great, Em. Grandpa really cared about you. But when we told his family, well, that was a whole different story. We were at another family dinner when I mentioned it, not thinking much of it. Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up like Christmas lights. $500,000? My word, Emily, that's quite a sum. Linda was quick to add her 2 cents. Oh, the things you could do with that money. But the mood shifted when Mr. Patterson coughed, a deep, rattling sound that had us all looking his way. He waved us off. Just a bit under the weather, that's all. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake off the concern for Mr. Patterson. He looked pale, more tired than usual. It was only a couple of days later when we got the news. Mark's voice was somber when he told me, "Dad's sick, Em. Really sick. The doctors are saying it's serious." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. How bad? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They're not sure. Could be weeks, maybe less." The news hit the family hard. Mrs. Patterson was a mess, but not in the way you'd expect. It was more about the what now than the what if. We were in their living room, Mrs. Patterson pacing like a caged animal. What are we going to do? The mortgage, the bills. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mrs. Patterson, shouldn't we be more worried about Mr. Patterson right now?" She rounded on me, her eyes sharp. "Of course I'm worried about him, but life goes on, Emily. We have to think about these things." Linda was nodding along, ever the faithful echo. "She's right, Emily. It's important to be practical." I looked at Mark, hoping for some support, but he just looked tired, torn between his ailing father and his panicking mother. I bit back any further comments. It wasn't the time or place, but as we left that night, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just Mr. Patterson's illness that worried me. It was the way Mrs. Patterson and Linda were so focused on the money, the house. It felt like priorities were all wrong, and I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Mark's dad's condition worsened fast. It was like watching a candle flicker out. We were spending more time at their place, trying to be there for him, you know? But Mrs. Patterson, she was a whole different story. Always talking about the mortgage, the bills, as if that was the biggest worry. One evening, we were all there, the whole family. Mr. Patterson was lying in bed, looking frail and tired. Out of nowhere, he asked to speak to Mark alone. Just them two. It was strange, seeing him so serious. Mark looked taken aback, but nodded. "Sure, Dad, let's talk." They went into the bedroom and closed the door. That's when I noticed Mrs. Patterson and Linda. They were like cats who heard a can opener. Their ears practically perked up. "What do you think they're talking about?" Linda whispered to Mrs. Patterson, not even trying to hide her curiosity. Mrs. Patterson had that look, you know, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "I don't know, but I bet it's about the will or the house." I was standing there, feeling awkward, when Linda turned to me. "Emily, you must be dying to know, right? I mean, with your husband being the only son and all." I shrugged, not wanting to play into their game. It's their business. If Mark wants to tell me, he will. But inside, I was curious. What was so important that it had to be said in private? After what felt like ages, Mark came out. His face was unreadable. Mrs. Patterson and Linda pounced like hawks. "Well, what did he say?" Mrs. Patterson demanded. Mark shook his head. "It's personal, Mom. Dad just had some things to get off his chest." Linda tried a different angle. "But it must be about his will, right? Or the house?" Mark's expression didn't change. "Linda, I'm not discussing it. It was a private conversation." The air was tense after that. Mrs. Patterson kept shooting me these looks, like I was hiding something. But the truth was, I knew as little as she did. That night, back at our place, I asked Mark about it. "So, what did your dad want to talk about?" Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me, his eyes serious. "He's worried, Em. About Mom, the house, everything. He just wanted to make sure I knew what to do, you know, after—" I nodded, understanding. Of course, but deep down, I had this feeling that there was more to it, something Mark wasn't telling me. And whatever it was, I knew it was big. Mr. Patterson's passing hit everyone like a ton of bricks. It was one of those times when you realize life's too short, but some people never get that memo. The funeral was barely over when Mrs. Patterson started talking about the mortgage again. We were all at their house after the service, kind of a somber gathering when she brought it up. Now that he's gone, we need to think about the future. The mortgage on this house won't pay itself. Linda was nodding along, always her loyal supporter. It's a lot of responsibility, especially now. I was still in my black dress, feeling the weight of the day when Mark's mom turned to me. "Emily, You recently came into some money, right? It only seems fair that you contribute, given the circumstances. I was stunned. Was she really asking me to pay off their mortgage with my inheritance? Mrs. Patterson, it's not why Grandpa left me that money. Mark was rubbing his temples, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but there. Mom, let's not do this now, please. But she was like a dog with a bone. Mark, I'm just being practical. We're family, and families support each other. Emily, you can afford it now, can't you? I felt my face getting hot. It's not about affording it. It's about what's right. That money was meant for me and Mark, for our future. Mrs. Patterson's face hardened. Well, this is your family's future too, isn't it? Unless you don't consider us family. Before I could reply, Mark squeezed my hand. Let's talk about this later, okay? It's been a long day. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't having it. No, I want to know now. What will you do, Emily? Will you help your family or not? The room was tense. Linda was watching me like a hawk, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath. We'll think about it, but this isn't the time or the place to decide. Mrs. Patterson seemed somewhat appeased, but her eyes were cold. Fine, but remember, family is everything. We have to stick together. As we left, I felt Mark's hand in mine, tight and reassuring. But inside, I was reeling. The nerve of her, asking for my inheritance like it was nothing. It felt like she was trying to claim something that wasn't hers, and it didn't sit right with me at all. After much back and forth and a heavy heart, I decided to use my inheritance to pay off the mortgage on Mrs. Patterson's house. It was a decision I didn't take lightly, and I did it mostly for Mark's sake. We were at Mrs. Patterson's house for a dinner she organized to celebrate the mortgage being paid off. The whole event felt surreal, like being thanked for a favor I never wanted to give. As we sat down for dinner, Mrs. Patterson was beaming. Emily, this is such a generous contribution you've made. We're all deeply thankful. I nodded, a tight smile on my face. Happy to help, Mrs. Patterson. Then Linda chimed in with her usual saccharine tone. Really, Emily, you're just too kind. The dinner was awkward but manageable, until Mrs. Patterson stood up with a glass in her hand for a toast. I have something to announce. Now that the mortgage is taken care of, I've decided to give this house to Dave and Linda. My jaw dropped. Excuse me? What did you just say? I expected Mark to be as shocked as I was, but to my surprise, he just nodded and smiled. Is that so, Mom? Interesting decision. His calm response threw me off. Why wasn't he upset? Mrs. Patterson looked pleased as punch. Yes, it only seems right. They need it more, and after all, Emily, you and Mark are doing fine on your own. Linda's grin was wide, almost gloating. We're just so grateful, aren't we, Dave? Dave nodded, looking like the cat that got the cream. I was fuming, feeling betrayed and used. We paid off this house with my money. How can you just give it away to them? Mrs. Patterson's expression was firm, almost challenging. I'm still the head of this family, Emily. It's my decision to make. Mark's hand on my knee under the table was a silent message to stay calm. His eyes were telling me he had a plan. As the dinner descended into an uncomfortable silence, my mind was racing. What was Mark up to? He clearly knew something I didn't. The look in his eyes was not of defeat, but of someone holding an ace up their sleeve. As we drove back, I turned to Mark. You knew, didn't you? You knew what your mother was going to do. Mark's smile was mysterious. Let's just say, I had a feeling. Don't worry, Em. This isn't over yet. His words were cryptic, but they gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't as outplayed as I thought. Sitting in our living room, the tension was thick. Mark finally broke the silence. Em, there's something you should know. About the house. Dad did something before he passed. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? Mark took a deep breath. Dad knew about Mom's plans with the house. He didn't trust her to do right by us. So he changed the mortgage and the house deed into our names. I was stunned. What? But how? He did it right after he found out about his illness, Mark explained. He wanted to make sure the house went to those who really paid for it. That's us, Em. We own the house now. I couldn't believe it. Mr. Patterson had seen through his wife's intentions and protected us. But why keep it a secret? I asked. Mark looked down. Dad asked me to. He didn't want more drama until it was absolutely necessary. Before we could talk further, there was an aggressive knock. Mrs. Patterson, Dave, and Linda stood at our door, their faces twisted in anger. Mrs. Patterson wasted no time. Mark, you need to explain this nonsense about the house. This is outrageous. Mark stood up, calm but firm. Mom, Dad knew what was happening. He legally transferred the house to us, the mortgage too. We paid it off, so now it's ours by law. Their reactions were explosive. Mrs. Patterson's face turned red with fury. That's impossible. He would never do that to me. Linda was almost hysterical. This is a lie. You're trying to steal our inheritance. Dave looked like he was about to explode. You can't just take the house, Mark. It's not yours. Mark handed them a folder. Here are the papers. The deed, the mortgage transfer, everything. It's all legal and binding. Mrs. Patterson snatched the papers, her hands trembling. As she scanned them, her face drained of color. This is a trick. You must have forced him, she screamed. No, Mom. Dad was clear-headed. He did this to protect what's fair, Mark replied, his voice steady. The argument went on, their accusations filling the room. But the truth was in black and white. The house was legally ours. You've torn this family apart, Linda yelled, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Patterson turned to me, eyes filled with hatred. You've done this, Emily. You and your money. But I stood my ground, feeling a sense of justice. No, Mrs. Patterson, this was Mr. Patterson's decision. He wanted to right a wrong. Eventually, they left, seething with anger and disbelief. The door closed behind them, leaving us in a bittersweet silence. We had the house, but at what cost? Yet, in my heart, I knew we had honored Mr. Patterson's wishes. He had given us a home, and in doing so, had also given us a new start. We thought the worst was over until Dave, red-faced with anger, burst into our house a few days later. You think you've won, huh? Dave was practically shouting. Dad paid a chunk of the mortgage before he died, $100,000. That means part of the house belongs to us. Mark remained calm, something I'd always admired about him. Dave, Dad thought of that. He asked me to deposit an equivalent amount into a separate account in case of disputes. I was standing in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Dave, his face a mix of anger and confusion, and Mrs. Patterson, who had followed him in, looking like a thundercloud. What? That's preposterous, Mrs. Patterson stammered. Mark continued. The $100,000 will be divided among the heirs, you, Mom, and me. That was Dad's wish. Mrs. Patterson was shaking with rage. This is a trick. You're manipulating everything. You've always been cruel and selfish. Linda, tears streaming down her face, joined in. How can you do this to your own family? It's heartless. The air was thick with tension and accusations. I felt a surge of courage and stepped forward. Enough! I raised my voice, something I rarely did. This is our home. Dad made his decision, and it's legal. It's time you all accept it. Dave was seething. This isn't the end, Mark. We won't let this go. Mark's response was firm, yet calm. You do what you need to, Dave. But this was Dad's decision. We're just honoring it. The confrontation ended with Mrs. Patterson, Dave, and Linda leaving our house, their threats and accusations still hanging in the air. As the door closed behind them, Mark and I were left in the quiet of our home, a mixture of relief and sadness in the air. Mark wrapped his arms around me. I'm sorry you had to go through all this, Em. I leaned into his embrace. It's not your fault. We did what was right. We stood there for a moment, in the home that had caused so much turmoil, but was now truly ours. The story ends with us, living peacefully in the house, while Mrs. Patterson moved in with Dave and Linda in their small apartment. It wasn't an easy victory, and the family ties were strained, but we had each other and a home that was ours, fair and square. That was enough for us.
I'm Ava. a 29-year-old stay-at-home mom living in a cozy house I inherited from my grandma. It's not just any house. It's a piece of my childhood filled with memories of baking cookies with grandma and playing hide and seek in its spacious rooms. Now, it's home to my own little family. My husband, Mark, a hardworking manager, and our 2-year-old sunshine Lily. Life sounds picture perfect, right? Well, it's not. The problem starts right next door, where Mark's parents, Helen and Frank, live. Our relationship, let's just say it's like mixing oil and water. Mommy, more juice! Lily's voice cuts through my thoughts. I pour her some juice, glancing at the clock. Almost 5 p.m. Time for the daily invasion. As if on cue, the door swings open. Ava, we're here! What's for dinner? Helen announces, with Frank shuffling in behind her. Hi, Helen. Frank? I've made a casserole, but it's just enough for Mark, Lily, and me, I reply, trying to keep my voice steady. Frank frowns. What do you mean, just enough? You know we come over for dinner? Helen chimes in, her tone sharp. You're at home all day, Ava. Is it too much to ask for a decent meal? I take a deep breath, feeling the frustration bubble up. I have my hands full with Lily, and cooking for 4 is a bit much every day. Mark walks in, tired from work. What's going on here? Your wife doesn't want to cook for us, Frank says, his voice raising. Mark looks at me, then at his parents, and sighs. Can't you just make a bit more, Ava? My frustration peaks. It's not about the amount, Mark. It's about respect and boundaries. Helen scoffs. Boundaries. We're family. Lily, sensing the tension, tugs at my dress. Mommy, I'm hungry. I kneel to her level. Let's get you seated, sweetie. Dinner is a tense affair. Mark's parents eat the sandwiches they brought, throwing disapproving glances my way. The TV blares in the background. Lily's fidgeting in her chair, and I'm trying not to crumble under the weight of this daily chaos. After they leave, Mark sits on the sofa, absorbed in his phone. We need to talk about this, I say, standing in front of him. He doesn't look up. Not now, Ava. I'm tired. And just like that, I'm left alone in the kitchen, cleaning up the mess, both literally and metaphorically. This is my life, a constant battle of wills, with me on one side and the world on the other. Life has a funny way of testing you, and mine's turning into a daily pop quiz with no right answers. I'm Ava, still juggling motherhood, a marriage that's running on autopilot, and in-laws who've mistaken my home for a free-for-all diner. It's another morning in our house, and I've made a decision. Today, I'm cooking only for 3, me, Mark, and our little Lily. Let's see how this goes. Lily's in her high chair, happily smearing oatmeal on her face when Helen and Frank barge in, just like clockwork. Morning, Ava. What's for breakfast? Helen asks, a bit too cheerily. I take a deep breath. Morning. I've only made enough for Lily and me today. Frank's face turns red. What do you mean? Are we supposed to starve? No, you're supposed to take care of your meals, I reply, trying to keep my voice calm. Helen's eyes narrow. This is ridiculous, Ava. We are family. You can't just... I cut her off. I can, and I did. I have enough on my plate with Lily and the house. Mark comes in, rubbing his eyes. Why's everyone shouting so early? Your wife refuses to cook for us, Frank's voice booms. Mark looks at me, then at his parents, and says, Ava, why are you making things difficult? Difficult? I almost laugh. Mark, I'm not a 24/7 restaurant. I need help, not more mouths to feed. Mark doesn't say anything, just grabs a piece of toast and leaves for work. The day drags on.
I can feel the tension thickening in the air. Dinner time rolls around, and I've stuck to my guns. Dinner for 3. Helen and Frank show up, each holding a sandwich. They sit down, unwrapping their food with exaggerated slowness. The TV's volume goes up, and up, until it's like we're at a rock concert. Lily's rubbing her eyes, clearly struggling to stay awake amidst the noise. "Could you turn that down?" Lily's trying to sleep, I ask, my patience wearing thin. Frank grunts. "We can't hear it if it's any lower." Helen adds, "You shouldn't be so uptight, Ava. It's just TV."
It's not just TV. It's my home turning into a battleground, and I'm losing.
Lily starts to cry, and I scoop her up, escaping to the quiet of her room. Later, Mark comes home to find his parents still there. The living room, a mess. Lily asleep in my arms. "What happened here?" he asks, looking around.
I'm too tired for another round of arguments. Just the usual,
I say, my voice flat. He doesn't push it, and neither do I. But inside, I feel something shift. I'm at my breaking point, and something's got to give.
Every day feels like walking on eggshells in my own house. I'm Ava, still trying to find a balance between being a mom, a wife, and now, apparently, an unwelcome host to my in-laws. But today, it's not the in-laws that shake my world, it's Mark. It's late evening. Lily's finally asleep after what felt like hours of soothing. I'm clearing up the toys when Mark walks in, looking like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders.
"Ava, we need to talk," he says, avoiding eye contact. I sit down, bracing myself. "What is it, Mark?" He takes a deep breath. "I made a mistake with our finances. I invested in something and it didn't pan out." I feel a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean? How bad is it?"
It's bad, really bad. I've lost a lot, like $100,000.
My heart stops. 100,000? How could you do that without telling me? Mark runs his hands through his hair, looking anywhere but at me. I thought I could make it big, you know? Fix everything.
Fix what? We were fine. I can barely keep the tremor out of my voice.
He finally looks at me, his eyes pleading. I know, but now we need a plan."
A plan?
I echo, feeling numb. "Yeah, I was thinking, maybe we could move my parents into our house, rent out their place to cover the debts." My mind races.
His parents in our house? Full time. The very thought makes me feel like I'm suffocating.
"Mark, are you serious?
After everything with your parents, you want them here in our house all the time?"
He sighs. "I know it's not ideal, but we don't have many options, Ava." I stand up, anger and disbelief swirling inside me.
Not ideal. It's a nightmare, Mark. And you just decided all of this without even talking to me?
He stands too, his voice rising.
What was I supposed to do, Ava? I'm trying to fix this.
By making my life a living hell, I shoot back.
There's a silence, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I speak.
My voice barely a whisper.
Fine. Move them in. But this is on you, Mark?
He nods, looking relieved and guilty all at once. But all I feel is a deep, sinking dread. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about trust, and I'm not sure how we come back from this. The day my in-laws moved in, it wasn't just their suitcases that entered our home. It was a tidal wave of chaos. Right from the start, it's clear that Helen and Frank are here to stay, and they have their own ideas about how things should be. "Frank, put that box in the living room and careful with it."
Helen's voice echoes through the hallway as she directs her husband with military precision. I watch, holding Lily, who clings to me, wide-eyed at the commotion. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, Helen turns to me, Ava. We need to talk about rearranging the house. We need space for our things. I feel a knot in my stomach. Rearranging, Helen? There's not much space to work with. She waves her hand dismissively. Nonsense. Let's start with Lily's playroom. She can play in her bedroom, right? I'm taken aback. That's her space, Helen. She loves it there. Frank, carrying a heavy box, chimes in. Kid won't mind, Ava. Don't make a fuss. Lily buries her face in my neck, and I realize this is just the beginning. The days that follow are a blur of unwelcome changes. Helen and Frank unpack their belongings, turning the living room into their personal space. They replace my tasteful decor with their old-fashioned knacks, and the TV blares day and night with their favorite shows. I try to cook dinner one evening, with Lily tugging at my apron. Frank strolls in, eyeing the pots on the stove. What's this? Another one of your experimental dishes. I bite my tongue. It's a new recipe, Frank. If it's not to your liking, feel free to make something yourself. He laughs. In my day, women knew how to cook for their families. I feel a flash of anger, but before I can respond, Mark enters, looking weary. Can't we have one peaceful meal? I turn to him, my patience wearing thin. Peaceful? Mark, your parents have turned our home upside down. He avoids my gaze, grabbing a beer and retreating to the now occupied living room. Weeks pass, and the tension only grows. Helen has opinions on everything, from how I raise Lily to how I should manage the house. Frank, meanwhile, has taken to criticizing my cooking at every meal. One afternoon, I'm folding laundry when Helen walks in. Ava, these sheets aren't folded properly. Let me show you how it's done. I set my jaw. Thanks, Helen, but I've been folding sheets my whole life. She tuts, clearly not the right way. As she refolds the sheets, I feel a sense of helplessness. My own home no longer feels like mine. Night falls and I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The muffled sounds of the TV and my in-laws' laughter seep through the walls. Lily is asleep, but rest eludes me. I think back to the days when this house was filled with love and laughter, a stark contrast to the present. It feels like I'm losing a part of myself, bit by bit, as each day passes. Mark's side of the bed is empty. He's been spending more and more time working late. I'm left alone, wondering how things got this bad, and what, if anything, I can do to take back control of my life and my home. In a house that once felt like mine, I'm Ava, now a spectator in my own life. With my in-laws' takeover and Mark's growing distance, I'm left grappling with suspicions that refuse to settle. One afternoon, while Lily naps and the house is momentarily quiet, I call my brother, Jake. He's always been the one I turn to in tough times. Hey, Jake, I say, trying to sound casual. Ava, how's it going? Haven't heard from you in a while. I take a deep breath. Not great, Jake. I'm worried about Mark. He's different. Jake's tone shifts, more serious now. Different how? He's always working late, secretive with his phone, and there's this tension, like he's hiding something. Jake pauses, then says, "You think he's seeing someone else?" The words sting, even though I've thought them 1,000 times. I don't know, Jake. I just feel like I'm losing him. There's a resolve in Jake's voice when he speaks. Let me do something. I have a friend, a private detective. He can discreetly check on Mark, see what's up. I'm hesitant. A detective? Isn't that a bit much? Ava, if something's wrong, you need to know. For you and Lily. I sigh, a mix of relief and fear. Okay, do it. But, Jake, keep it quiet. I don't want to stir up more trouble if it's nothing. You got it. I'll take care of it, he assures me. Days pass, and each of Mark's late nights and hushed phone calls add to my growing unease. Then, one evening, Jake calls. Ava, I have some news. Can you meet me tomorrow? Just you? My heart sinks. Yes, I can make it. The next day, I sit across from Jake in a quiet cafe, the air thick with anticipation. So, what did you find out? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake hesitates, then hands me an envelope. Ava, it's not good. I open it to find photos and reports. There's Mark with a woman I don't recognize and a child. My world spins. He has a child? Jake nods solemnly. I'm sorry, Ava. The detective confirmed it. Mark's been living a double life. Tears blur my vision. How could he do this? To me? To Lily? Jake reaches across the table, his hand on mine. You're stronger than you know, Ava. We'll figure this out together. I nod, wiping away tears. I need to confront him, Jake. He has to explain this. Be careful, Ava. You don't know how he'll react. I have to know, Jake. I have to know why. Armed with the truth, but shattered inside, I head home. A confrontation is inevitable, and I need to brace myself for the storm that's about to hit. It's the evening of the dinner, and I'm Ava, preparing a meal that I know even my critical mother-in-law can't find fault with. The house is buzzing with a tense energy as I await the arrival of my brother, Jake. Tonight is about more than a family dinner. It's about unveiling a painful truth. As I set the table, I can feel the weight of the envelope in my pocket, heavy with the evidence of Mark's betrayal. My hands shake slightly, but I steady myself. This needs to be done. The dinner starts off like any other. Mark's parents, Helen and Frank, along with Mark, sit around the table, complimenting the food for a change. I catch Mark's eye, and he gives me a small, oblivious smile. It's almost time. Jake arrives, apologizing for being late. As he sits down, he casually turns to Mark. So, Mark, Ava told me about your investment ventures. Sounds interesting. Mark, caught off guard, coughs. Oh yeah, it's nothing big. I watch as Jake probes further. What kind of investments? Stocks? Real estate? Mark stumbles over his words. A bit of everything, really. I can see the confusion on Jake's face, feigned for the others, but all too real for me. Can you tell me more? I've been looking to invest myself? Mark fumbles, clearly out of his depth. It's complex stuff, hard to explain over dinner. That's my cue. I pull out the envelope and place it on the table, pushing it towards Mark. Maybe this will help explain, I say, my voice steady. Everyone's attention shifts to the envelope. Mark opens it, his face draining of color as he sees the photos. Him with another woman and a child. Helen gasps, Mark, what is this? Frank looks on, stunned into silence. Mark tries to speak, but nothing coherent comes out. He looks at me, betrayal in his eyes. Ava, why? Why? You have a second family, Mark. How could you do this to us? So you moved your parents to my house, and with the money you received from renting their apartment, you kept your mistress? I'm almost yelling now, the pain and anger I've been holding back spilling over. The room is silent, the air thick with shock. Helen and Frank look between Mark and the photos, disbelief written all over their faces. You lied to us, to your own family, Helen whispers, her voice filled with hurt. Frank just shakes his head, unable to find words. Mark stands up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need to explain," he says, "but it's clear no explanation can undo this." He walks out of the room, and I'm left there with his parents in a deafening silence. The air in the house is thick with tension the morning after the revelation. I'm Ava, still reeling from the shock, but ready to face the consequences. Helen and Frank, Mark's parents, confront me in the kitchen, their faces twisted with anger. Helen's voice is sharp as a knife. "You! This is your doing! You drove our son to this!" I stare at her, disbelief and anger mixing in my gut. "Me? Your son lied to all of us, Helen?" Frank chimes in, his voice just as accusing. "He was always a good boy until he married you. You must have pushed him away." My hands tremble with fury. I pushed him away. I cared for our family while he... Helen cuts me off. "Oh, save it. You probably had men on the side too. That's why he did what he did." "I've had enough. How dare you?" I yell. "I've been nothing but loyal and supportive, and you blame me for your son's betrayal?" Frank steps closer, his face red. "Our son would never have done this if it weren't for you." I take a step back, my heart pounding. "You know what? I don't need to listen to this. This is my house, and I want you out. Now..." Helen scoffs. "You can't kick us out. This is our son's house too." I stand my ground, firm and unwavering. "No, Helen. This house was my grandmother's, and now it's mine. You have no right to be here after what you've said." Frank looks like he wants to argue, but Helen grabs his arm. "Let's go, Frank. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted." As they pack their things, I feel a mix of relief and sadness. Once they're gone, I lock the door behind them, the click of the lock echoing in the empty house. Alone in the silence, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I look around the house, my house, and for the first time in a long while, I see a future where Lily and I can be free from lies and betrayal. I pick up the phone to call a locksmith. It's time to change the locks, to change our lives. The house feels different today, like a new chapter has just begun. I'm Ava, standing in my once troubled living room, now a space of peace and possibility. The legal battle is over, and the court's decision still echoes in my mind. I recall my lawyer's words from yesterday. The court has granted you substantial alimony and compensation for Mark's deceit and infidelity. He'll be paying for quite some time. I had felt a mix of relief and vindication hearing that. It wasn't about the money. It was about accountability. Lily, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world, plays on the floor. Her laughter is a balm to my soul. I watch her, thinking about our future. The phone rings, snapping me back to the present. It's Jake, checking in. "Hey, Ava, how are you holding up?" I smile. "Better, Jake. Much better." The court's decision helped close a painful chapter. Jake's voice is warm. "I'm glad, Ava. You deserve peace after all this." I glance at Lily. We both do. As I talk to Jake, I can't help but think about Mark. The last I heard, he was struggling to make ends meet, now living with his parents again. "It's ironic," I say to Jake. "He's back where he started, but this time by his own doing." Jake sighs. "He brought it on himself, Ava. You did what you had to do." I nod, feeling a sense of closure. Mark's choices led him here, and I no longer feel any obligation to worry about him. After the call, I sit with Lily, watching her play. The court's decision has given us a financial cushion, but more importantly, it's given us freedom. "Mommy, look!" Lily holds up a drawing of our house. "Our home," she says proudly. I hug her. "Yes, sweetie, our happy home." I realize then, that this is just the beginning for us. A beginning filled with hope, strength, and the love we have for each other. The road ahead is ours to shape, and I feel ready to embrace whatever comes our way, with Lily by my side.
I remember that day clearly. It was a sunny Tuesday when I was about to meet Mark's parents for the first time. I was nervous but excited. Mark and I had been dating for 2 years, and he had finally popped the question. I had heard a lot about his parents, but we'd never met. Mark had always described his parents as traditional and a bit old-fashioned. I guess I didn't realize what that meant until I met them. We decided to meet at a local cafe. I arrived first, wearing my favorite blue dress, hoping to make a good impression. Mark arrived with his parents. His mom, Mrs. Thompson, wore a stern look, and his dad, Mr. Thompson, seemed uninterested in everything around him. "Kate, these are my parents, John and Margaret Thompson," Mark introduced us. "Nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," I said with a smile. "Likewise," Mrs. Thompson replied, scanning me from head to toe. "Mark tells us you're a lawyer. Where do you work?" I was taken aback by her directness but managed to reply, "At Johnson and Partners, downtown." "And your salary? Must be good, being a lawyer and all," Mr. Thompson chimed in, his tone blunt. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's adequate for my needs," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "And where do you plan to live after the wedding?" I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd step in, but he just shrugged. "We're still discussing that," I said. "And your parents, what do they do?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice almost demanding. "They run a small business," I replied, growing uncomfortable with the interrogation. Mrs. Thompson snorted. "Small business, huh? Let's hope they can contribute decently to the wedding." I felt a knot in my stomach. Mark noticed my discomfort but said nothing. As we ordered, Mrs. Thompson kept making side comments about the prices, and Mr. Thompson kept nodding in agreement. The whole meeting felt more like a business transaction than a family gathering. I remember thinking, is this what my future looks like? I tried to shrug off the feeling, telling myself it was just first meeting jitters. But deep down, I knew this was a red flag I couldn't ignore. It didn't take long after that first meeting for Mark's parents to become a constant, unsettling presence in my life. Their calls would come at any hour, disrupting my daily routine. Each ring of the phone started to feel like an intrusion. One evening, just as I was about to leave my office, my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Thompson. "Kate, dear, I need you to look over some legal papers for us." "It's just a small favor," she said, her voice laced with expectation. I sighed, feeling the weight of her request. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm actually just heading out from work. Can it wait?" "Oh, it's just a quick look." "You can do it, can't you? For family," she pressed. I agreed reluctantly, knowing this was becoming a pattern. The next day, Mr. Thompson called. "Kate, I need help with setting up a new TV. Mark's busy, can you swing by?" Their requests were becoming more frequent and more demanding. I tried talking to Mark about it. "Mark, your parents are calling me all the time. For legal advice, for tech support, for everything," I said, hoping he'd understand. "They're just being friendly, Kate." "They're like that with everyone," Mark replied casually, brushing off my concerns. "But it's too much. They're calling me at work, at odd hours." "I'm feeling overwhelmed," I insisted. "Come on, Kate. They're harmless. Just trying to bond with you," he said, not meeting my eyes. I felt a mix of frustration and helplessness. It was as if Mark was completely blind to his parents' overbearing behavior. One evening, as we were having dinner at my place, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, again. "Kate, can you come over tomorrow? I need some advice on redecorating the living room." "You have such good taste," she said. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm not really an interior designer." I started, but she cut me off. "But you have such a lovely home. I insist." "We'll have lunch," she said, making it sound more like a command than a request. I hung up, feeling trapped. Mark just shrugged and said, "See? They really like you." But to me, it felt more like they were taking advantage of me, and Mark's indifference was only making it worse. I started to wonder if this was what my future with Mark would be like, constantly being at the beck and call of his parents, with no support from him. It was a Friday evening when Mark suggested we go out for dinner with his parents. He chose a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind where you'd think twice before checking the prices on the menu. I had a hunch it wouldn't be a casual, relaxing dinner, and boy, was I right. We arrived at the restaurant, and the Thompsons were already there, scanning the menu. Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up when she saw the lobster and steak options. "Kate, you simply must try the lobster here. It's divine!" Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. I glanced at the menu and saw the price. It was more than I wanted to spend, but before I could respond, Mr. Thompson chimed in. "Mark told us you're doing well at your firm. Surely, a successful lawyer like you can afford a little splurge now and then," he said, his tone a bit too pointed. Feeling cornered, I smiled weakly and said, "Actually, I was thinking of something lighter, maybe a salad." Mrs. Thompson looked at me as if I had suggested something outrageous. "A salad? Nonsense, you're at one of the best restaurants in town. You must try their specialties." I felt uncomfortable, but decided not to argue. I didn't want to cause a scene. As we were eating, the conversation revolved around Mark and his achievements, with his parents occasionally throwing in a question or two about my work, but not really listening to my answers. Then came the moment of truth, the bill. Mr. Thompson patted his pockets and then looked at his wife with a feigned expression of surprise. "Oh dear, I think I left my wallet at home," he said, his voice a little too calm for someone who'd just dined lavishly on someone else's dime. Mrs. Thompson joined in the charade. "John, how could you be so forgetful? I don't have mine either." I looked at Mark, expecting him to step in, but he just shrugged and mumbled, "I guess I forgot my card too." I couldn't believe it. Were they serious? It was clear this wasn't just forgetfulness. It felt more like a setup. With a sinking feeling, I pulled out my card and handed it to the waiter. Mrs. Thompson smiled sweetly at me. "Thank you, dear. You're such a lifesaver." As we left the restaurant, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Was I just a walking wallet to them? And why didn't Mark say anything? With the wedding drawing nearer, it became increasingly clear that it was time for our parents to meet. Given all my experiences with Mark's parents, I was bracing myself for this encounter. I remember pacing in my living room, phone in hand, rehearsing how I'd break the news to my parents. I finally mustered the courage and called them. "Hey, Mom, Dad, I think it's time you met Mark's parents," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Kate, we've been so excited about this. When can we meet them?" Mom's voice was a mix of enthusiasm and curiosity. I took a deep breath before adding a cautious note. "Just to give you a heads up, they're a bit, well, intense." Dad's voice came through with a chuckle. "Kate, we've seen all sorts in our days. Don't you worry, we'll manage." His confidence was comforting, but I couldn't shake off my apprehensions. We decided the Grandview Hotel, known for its pleasant ambience and beautiful surroundings. It was a familiar place to me, which I hoped would provide a distraction if things got too intense. The next day, I mentioned the plan to Mark over breakfast. "So, we're meeting at the Grandview Hotel this Saturday. I think it'll be nice for our parents to meet in a neutral, relaxed setting." Mark nodded, absorbed in his phone. "Sure, sounds good. I'll let my folks know." I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of preparation. I wanted to ensure that everything was perfect, hoping it would help keep the peace. As the day grew closer, my nerves began to fray. I found myself obsessing over every little detail, from what I would wear to how I would steer the conversation away from any potentially sensitive topics. On the eve of the meeting, I lay awake, scenarios running through my head. What if Mark's parents said something offensive? What if my parents didn't like them? What if the whole lunch turned into a disaster? The morning of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. I chose a simple but elegant dress, hoping to strike the right balance between casual and formal. Mark, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed by the significance of the day. "It's just lunch, Kate. Everything will be fine," he said nonchalantly as he got dressed. His calmness did little to soothe my anxiety. If anything, it made me feel more alone in my concerns. I wondered if he truly understood how his parents' behavior had been affecting me, or if he was just choosing to ignore it. As we drove to the hotel, I went over the plan in my head. Keep the conversation light, avoid controversial topics, and try to ensure everyone gets along. Simple, right? The Grandview Hotel looked stunning as always, its elegant facade basking in the afternoon sun. As Mark and I walked into the lobby, my stomach was doing somersaults. I spotted my parents first, sitting in the lounge area. They stood up as we approached, smiles on their faces. "Kate, dear, you look wonderful," my mom said, giving me a reassuring hug. Dad gave me a firm, supportive pat on the back. Mark's parents arrived shortly after. The air seemed to change as soon as they walked in. Mrs. Thompson's eyes scanned the lobby like she was assessing the value of every item. "Nice place you've chosen, Kate," Mr. Thompson commented dryly, as he shook hands with my parents. "We thought it'd be a lovely spot for everyone to get together," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. We moved to the dining area, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. A hotel employee approached us with an apologetic look. "I'm so sorry, but we're a bit overbooked today. We only have a few single rooms and 2 triple rooms available," he explained. "One of the triple rooms is our finest suite, with all amenities. The other is more basic and close to the road, so it can be a bit noisy," he added. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Thompson jumped in. "Well, obviously, John, Mark, and I will take the suite. Kate, you can cover the cost, right? After all, you organized this meeting." I was taken aback by her audacity. Well, I was thinking my parents and I could take the suite, But Mrs. Thompson cut me off. "Nonsense. We're the guests. And besides, you're the one with the big lawyer salary." My dad, trying to defuse the situation, suggested, "Why don't we discuss this over lunch and decide afterward?" Lunch was a tense affair. Conversation was forced, and I noticed Mark's parents sizing up my folks, their comments edged with subtle digs. My parents, to their credit, kept their cool, responding with grace and humor. As we neared the end of the meal, the room topic resurfaced. Mrs. Thompson was adamant. "We should get the suite. It's only proper. Kate can afford it." Mark, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Mom's right. It's important they're comfortable." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he really siding with them over this? My mom, ever the peacemaker, suggested, "Why don't we let the hotel decide? They can assign rooms based on availability." But Mrs. Thompson wouldn't have it. "Kate said you have a small business. I think you're not used to luxury. The simplest room should suit you. It is just designed for people with small incomes." The tension was palpable. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about rooms, it was about respect, something Mark's parents seemed to have little of, especially for me and my family. As the tension in the hotel lobby mounted, my father, George, cleared his throat and stepped forward, commanding everyone's attention. "There's something you all should know," he said, his voice calm and assertive. Mark, his parents, and I all looked at him, curious and a bit confused. "This hotel," Dad continued, along with several others across the country, "belongs to our family business." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Mrs. Thompson's mouth dropped open, and Mr. Thompson's eyes widened in shock. Mark turned to me, his face a mix of surprise and disbelief. "You own this hotel?" Mrs. Thompson finally managed to sputter out. "Yes, and a few more," Dad replied casually. "We've always preferred to keep a low profile." The hotel employee, recognizing my father, suddenly seemed very flustered. "Mr. Williams, I apologize for the inconvenience earlier. I had no idea." Dad dismissed his concerns with a wave. "It's fine. But we will be taking the suite, and Mark's family can have the other room. And there's no need for Kate to pay." Suddenly, Mrs. Thompson's demeanor shifted dramatically. She became excessively flattering, her tone oozing with a newfound affection. "George, Linda, what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea. You must be so proud of your accomplishments." Mark, who had been silent until now, turned to me, an eager look in his eyes. "Kate, this is incredible. We should move up our wedding date, don't you think?" I looked around at their changed faces, the forced smiles, the sycophantic attitudes. It was all too much, too fake. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. "Actually, Mark, there won't be a wedding. I'm calling off the engagement." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered, Mr. Thompson looked stunned, and Mark was speechless. "I can't be a part of a family that only values people for their wealth and status," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the pretense, the expectations, and a future that no longer felt right for me. As I walked away from the hotel, my heart pounding and my mind racing, I heard Mark's footsteps hurrying after me. "Kate, wait, please. Let's talk about this," he pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. I stopped and turned to face him, feeling a surge of determination. "What is there to talk about, Mark? Your parents' behavior? Your indifference?" Before Mark could reply, Mrs. Thompson stormed up to us, her face red with anger. "Ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you," she spat out, her words laced with venom. I stared at her in disbelief. "Done for me? You've done nothing but disrespect me and my family." Mrs. Thompson's tirade continued, her words becoming more hurtful. "Stupid girl. You and your parents think you're better than us, don't you?" Mark looked torn between us, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. It was then that my father, George, stepped in. His voice was calm but carried an authority that stopped Mrs. Thompson in her tracks. "I think it's time for you to leave our hotel," he said firmly. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. "We're not going anywhere. You can't make us." Dad turned to the hotel staff. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Thompson out. They are no longer welcome here." The staff moved in, politely but firmly guiding Mark's parents away. Mrs. Thompson was still hurling insults over her shoulder as they left. Mark looked at me, a mix of confusion and regret in his eyes. "Kate, I'm sorry, I didn't expect." But I cut him off. "It's too late for sorry, Mark. Your silence said everything I needed to know." With those final words, I walked away from him, the sound of his mother's angry voice fading into the background. I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. It hurt to end things with Mark, but I knew it was the right decision. As I drove home, the weight of the day's events began to sink in. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. A chapter where I stood up for myself and refused to settle for anything less than what I deserved. The days following the breakup were a whirlwind of emotions. I oscillated between relief, sadness, and a newfound sense of freedom. The decision to end my engagement with Mark, though painful, felt like the first step towards a future where I respected my own worth. One evening, as I sat on my porch, my mom called. "Kate, how are you holding up, sweetheart?" Her voice was full of concern. I took a deep breath, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I'm doing okay, Mom. It's been hard, but I feel like it was the right decision. You're stronger than you realize, Kate. And we're so proud of you, she said warmly. I smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for my supportive family. Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you and Dad. There was a brief pause before she spoke again. You know, sometimes the end of one thing is just the start of something new. Something better. Her words struck a chord in me. You're right, Mom. This is a chance for a new beginning. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work and spent time with friends who had been my pillars of strength. Their support was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. One weekend, while having lunch with my best friend, Sarah, she said, "You know, Kate, I think you did something many wouldn't have the courage to do. You stood up for yourself." I nodded, stirring my coffee. It was tough, but I realized I have to be true to myself. I can't be in a relationship where I'm not valued. Sarah smiled, raising her glass. To new beginnings and self-respect. May this be the start of something wonderful for you. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a sense of optimism about the future. In the weeks that followed, I found a new sense of independence. I explored hobbies I'd put on the back burner and even started planning a solo trip, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. Life after Mark was different, but it was empowering. I realized that being on my own wasn't something to fear, but an opportunity to discover myself and what I truly wanted in life. As I packed my bags for the trip, I felt a thrill of excitement. This was my journey, my path to discovering who I was outside of a relationship. I was moving forward, not with bitterness, but with hope and an open heart, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.
I remember sitting on our old, squeaky porch steps, the paint chipping off like it couldn't wait to leave, just like Dad. Mom used to say he had wheels under his feet and a heart too big for any map. I never really got what that meant until the police came that day, saying Dad's truck was found abandoned by the side of some forgotten highway. I was just 7, clinging to Mom's skirt, not really understanding, but feeling the weight of her silent tears. Mom, Jane, was a fighter though. Without Dad, she took on double shifts at the local diner. I'd often fall asleep to the sound of her coming home late, trying to be quiet but never quite managing it. One evening, when I was about 12, I asked her, "Mom, why do you work so much? Aren't you tired?" She sat beside me, her eyes tired but kind. "Ella, we've got to make ends meet. Life's tough, but we're tougher, right?" I nodded, not fully understanding but proud to be tough like Mom. Then came the hammer blow that was Mom's cancer diagnosis when I was 18. She fought it, hard, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with a spoon. She passed away quietly, leaving me with nothing but memories and a stack of bills. College was supposed to be my escape, my dream. I managed to scrape together enough for the first year, but after that, I was on my own. I juggled classes with 2, sometimes 3, jobs, anything that would pay. One particularly grueling night at the campus library, I remember breaking down. I was alone, surrounded by books that seemed as heavy as the world on my shoulders. That's when I first met John. He walked over, his eyes full of concern. "Hey, are you okay?" I wiped my eyes, embarrassed. "Yeah, just college stuff." He smiled, a little awkwardly. "I get it. I'm John, by the way." "Ella," I replied, managing a small smile. That's how it all started with John. He was different, kind, and always there, like a steady rock in my turbulent sea. He didn't have much, but he shared everything he had with me, half a sandwich, notes from classes, even his old, battered laptop. We'd sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the silence. It was comfortable, safe. I hadn't felt that way since Mom was around. "You know, Ella," John said one day, "you're the strongest person I know. You're going to make it, I'm sure of it." I laughed, a bit bitterly. Strong? I feel like I'm barely hanging on. That's what being strong is about, isn't it? Hanging on, even when it's the last thing you want to do. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized he was right. I was strong, like Mom. And somehow, I knew I'd make it through, with or without wheels under my feet. College life wasn't anything like those fancy brochures. It was hard, gritty, and it tested you in ways you never thought possible. I remember my second year, standing in line at the financial aid office, my stomach in knots. The lady at the counter looked at me like I was just another number. Next, she called out, not even looking up. "Hi, I'm here about my scholarship renewal." I began, but she cut me off. "If it's not renewed in the system, there's nothing I can do." Next. I walked away, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. That's when I bumped into John again. He was always popping up when I least expected it. "Hey, Ella, everything okay?" he asked, his brows furrowed with concern. I shook my head. "No, not really. Financial aid's a dead end. Looks like I might have to drop out." John was quiet for a moment. "That's rough. But hey, don't give up. You're smarter than half the professors here." I chuckled, despite the gloom. "Thanks, John. I don't know what to do." "Come on, let's grab a coffee." My treat. "You can tell me all about it." That coffee turned into many more. John became my go-to person at college. He had this way of making problems seem smaller, more manageable. We'd sit in the cafeteria, him with his endless optimism, me trying not to drown in my own worries. One day, he said, "You know, Ella, you should start looking for a job on campus. Might help with the money situation." I rolled my eyes. "You think I haven't tried? It's like everyone's out to get me or something." John leaned in. "Not everyone. I hear the library's looking for someone. You're always there anyway, might as well get paid for it." I thought about it. Maybe, but what if they say no? Then we find something else. You're not in this alone, Ella. That's how I ended up working at the library. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid some bills. Between stacking books and serving coffees at a local cafe, I barely had time for studies. But I was making it work, one day at a time. John and I grew closer. He wasn't just the guy who bought me coffee anymore. He was my friend, my confidant. He knew about my mom, my dad, and all the messy bits in between. It was one evening, while closing up the library, that John said something that stuck with me. "Ella, you're going to make something of yourself. I just know it. And I'll be here, cheering you on." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Thanks, John. That means a lot." College was tough, but with John by my side, it felt like I had a fighting chance. He was more than a friend, he was a reminder that some good still existed in this crazy, mixed-up world. After college, life took a turn I didn't expect. John and I got married. It wasn't some big fairy tale wedding, just a small courthouse do, with a few friends and less fanfare. We moved into this tiny apartment that had more cracks than walls, but it was ours. It felt like a fresh start, a new chapter. Then came the problem. John's mom, Mrs. Smith. The woman was a piece of work. The first time she visited our place, her nose wrinkled like she'd walked into a dumpster. "This is where you live," she said, her voice dripping with something that was half disbelief, half disgust. I tried to smile. "Yeah, it's not much, but we're happy." She snorted. "Happy? John, you can do better than this. And what about kids? You can't raise kids in this. John cut in, trying to ease the tension. "Mom, we've talked about this. We're not rushing into kids. We're focusing on our careers right now." But she wouldn't have it. Every visit was a new complaint. The apartment's too small. The neighborhood's not good enough. Why isn't Ella cooking more? It went on and on. One evening, after she'd left, I turned to John, frustration boiling over. Doesn't it bother you? The way your mom talks about our life? John, ever the peacemaker, shrugged. She's just worried about us. That's how she shows love, I guess. That's not love, John. That's criticism. There's a difference. He didn't say much after that. It was like he couldn't see what was so clear to me. His mom's words were chipping away at us, bit by bit. Things got worse when she started hinting we should move somewhere better. I lost it one day. John, we can't afford some fancy place. Why doesn't she get that? John looked uncomfortable. She just wants the best for us, Ella. Maybe we could look at some other apartments, just to keep her quiet. Keep her quiet? John, when are you going to stand up to her? We're married. This is our life, not hers. He didn't have an answer. That silence said more than any words could. So, we kept living our life, in our tiny apartment, with Mrs. Smith's disapproval hanging over us like a bad smell. I loved John, but his inability to stand up to his mom was driving a wedge between us. It was like he was still her little boy, not a grown man married and making his own way in the world. As time marched on, so did our lives, but in different directions. I landed a job at a marketing firm, and it was demanding as hell, but I loved it. I was climbing the ladder, making something of myself. John, on the other hand, was stuck in the same old job, a manager at a local retail store. He seemed okay with it, but I couldn't understand why he didn't want more. One night, I came home late, exhausted but buzzing from a successful project. John was on the couch, glued to some TV show. I flopped down beside him. You won't believe the day I had. We landed the big account. John grunted, "That's great, Ella." I frowned, looking for some enthusiasm. "Aren't you happy for me?" He turned, a bit annoyed. "Of course, I am. It's all you ever talk about. Work, work, work." I sat up, stung. "Well, sorry for being passionate about my career. What do you want me to do? Be like you, satisfied with just getting by?" He shot up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means, why don't you want more, John? Why are you content just being this?" He didn't answer, just stormed off to bed. I stayed on the couch, fuming and hurt. The tension spilled over into everything. Even simple conversations turned into minefields. Then came the day when John dropped a bombshell. He wanted us to move to a bigger place, something more befitting our status. I stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Befitting our status? John, we can't afford a fancy place. We're doing fine here. He was insistent, but we can't live like this forever, Ella. And my mom keeps saying. I cut him off. "Oh, so it's your mom again? When are you going to stop listening to her and start living for us?" John's face turned red. "I'm thinking about our future, Ella. Maybe you should too." That hurt. It felt like he didn't see all the hard work I was putting into building that future. It was like we were on different planets. In the end, we did move, to a house that cost us a whopping 12 grand a month. I could afford it, but it was a stretch. John seemed happier, but every time I wrote that rent check, I felt a part of me scream in protest. We were living in a house that was too big, with a gap between us that was growing wider. I lay awake most nights, wondering how we got here. Was it the money? The jobs? Or had we just changed too much? Just when I thought things couldn't get more strained between John and me, life threw a curveball. John's dad fell seriously ill. It hit John hard. They were close. Overnight, our already fragile routine got upended. One evening, after a particularly rough visit to the hospital, John slumped into a chair, looking like the world was on his shoulders. "Dad's not doing good, Ella. The doctors, they say he needs constant care. I sat beside him, trying to be the supportive wife. I'm so sorry, John. Maybe we can get a nurse to help? He shook his head, his eyes distant. No, I've been thinking. I'm going to take care of him. I'll quit my job and move in for a while. I was stunned. Quit your job? John, are you sure? What about our bills, the rent for this place? He snapped, this isn't about money, Ella. It's my dad. I need to be there for him. I understood, I really did, but the practical side of me was screaming. And I get that, John, but we need to think this through. We can find another way to help your dad. He wouldn't budge. No, my mind's made up. I'm doing this. So, he did. John moved into his parents' place, leaving me alone in our big, empty house. Days turned into weeks. I was juggling my job and all our bills, while he was. I don't even know what. Every time I called or visited, it was the same scene. John, either glued to his phone or the TV, looking exhausted and frustrated. His mom, Mrs. Smith, was always hovering, throwing in her 2 cents. One day, I found him sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand, eyes glued to some game. John, shouldn't you be with your dad? He barely glanced at me. He's sleeping. What do you want me to do, sit and stare at him? I bit back my frustration. You could look for a part-time job, help out with our expenses. That got his attention. He sat up, angry. Really, Ella? You want me to work now? While my dad's lying there dying? I tried to keep my voice steady. We're drowning in bills, John. I can't handle everything on my own. His mom walked in then, always perfect timing. Ella, John is doing a noble thing, taking care of his father. You should be grateful. Grateful? The word hit me like a slap. Grateful? I'm keeping our lives afloat while he sits here doing, what? Playing caretaker while watching TV and drinking? John stood up, towering over me. You just don't get it, do you? This is family. Maybe if you had one, you'd understand. That cut deep. Too deep. I walked out, the sound of his mom's tut-tuts chasing me. I drove home, tears blurring my vision. This wasn't the man I married. This was a stranger, living a life I didn't sign up for. The days after John's father passed were tough. I expected things might start to shift back to normal, but they never did. John never went back to work. Instead, he spent more and more time at his mom's place, leaving me alone in our big, expensive house, drowning in bills and loneliness. One evening, I came home from work to find John and his mother, Mrs. Smith, sitting in the living room. The air was thick with tension. I could tell something was up. Ella, we need to talk, John said, not even bothering to look at me. I set my bag down, feeling a knot in my stomach. What's going on? Mrs. Smith, who always had too much to say, started, We've decided it's best if John and I live here. We can take care of the rent now. I was shocked. What? This is our home, John. You can't just kick me out. John finally looked at me, his eyes cold. It's not working, Ella. You and me, this life. I need to start over, and Mom needs a place to stay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Start over? So, you're just going to throw away our marriage, just like that? He shrugged. It's been over for a while, hasn't it? We're just making it official now. I turned to his mother. And you think you can just come in here and take over my life? Mrs. Smith stood up, her voice sharp. It's for the best, Ella. You and John were never a good match. He needs to be with family now. I was seething. Family? What about me? I'm his wife. John stood up, facing me. Not anymore. We want you out, Ella. The sooner, the better. I looked between them, the betrayal cutting deep. Fine. I'll go. But don't think for a second that this is okay. You're both making a huge mistake. I packed a bag with my essentials, my hands shaking with rage and hurt. As I walked out the door, John's voice followed me. We're doing what needs to be done, Ella. You'll see, this is for the best. Settling into my new, modest apartment felt like a fresh start. It was small, but it was a place where I could finally breathe, away from the stifling atmosphere of my past life with John and his overbearing mother. The walls were bare, and the furniture was minimal, a stark contrast to the lavishness I'd left behind. As I was arranging my few belongings, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old mutual friend of John and me, Laura. Hey Ella, have you heard about John and his mom? They're living it up. Expensive clothes, fancy gadgets. Wonder where all that money's coming from? I stared at the screen, a mix of curiosity and bitterness swirling in me. Where were they getting the money? I thought back to the expensive house, the bills, and the lifestyle they had insisted on. It didn't add up. Shaking my head, I typed a quick reply, no idea, Laura. Good for them, I guess. But the question nagged at me. I couldn't help but wonder how they were affording such extravagance, especially after kicking me out and with John not working. A few days later, I ran into another friend, Mike, at the grocery store. He brought it up again. Ella, you won't believe it. Saw John and his mom at the high-end electronics store. They were buying like there's no tomorrow. Heard they even sold their family home. Crazy, huh? I forced a smile, yeah, crazy. But inside, my mind was racing. They sold the family home? Was that where the money was coming from? As I unpacked groceries in my kitchen, a small, unadorned space that was now my refuge, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I was moving on, building my life again from scratch, while they seemed to be living in a world of luxury built on, what? Lies? Deceit? I sat down at my tiny dining table, a second-hand purchase, and let out a long breath. It didn't matter, I told myself. I was out of that toxic environment, free from their twisted dynamics. But deep down, I knew the truth. It did bother me. It bothered me that they seemed to be thriving after throwing me to the curb. I had worked hard for everything I had, while they seemed to be enjoying a life of ease and comfort. As the evening wore on, I found solace in the quiet of my apartment. It was mine, earned through my own effort and resilience. I had lost much, but I had gained something more valuable, my independence, my sense of self. 4 months into my new life, the past came knocking in a way I never expected. My phone rang one lazy Saturday morning, the caller ID flashing John's name. I hesitated but answered. Ella, we need your help. John's voice was shaky, desperate. I sat up, alert. What's happened, John? It's all gone wrong. We got kicked out of the rental house. Mom and we have nowhere to go. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Kicked out? But I thought you had money? There was a pause, then, the money's gone, Ella. Dad left debts, not inheritance. We thought, his voice trailed off. I felt a mix of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a tinge of satisfaction. Were they really posh all this time, hoping for a rich inheritance? Seriously? It was too much even for my ex-husband. So, what do you want from me, John? We were wondering if, maybe we could stay with you, just for a while, until we sort things out. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You want to stay with me? After everything? John's voice was pleading now. Please, Ella. We have nowhere else to go. Remember the good times, can't we just? I cut him off. Good times? John, you and your mother threw me out of my own home. You can't just come crawling back now that things are tough. He was silent for a moment, then, I know I messed up, Ella. I'm sorry. We're just really desperate. I took a deep breath, my decision clear. John, I've moved on. I've built a new life, and there's no place for you or your mother in it. You need to figure this out on your own. But Ella. No, John. It's over. You made your choice, now live with it. I hung up, my heart pounding. I felt a surge of empowerment, mixed with a twinge of sadness. John, the man I once loved, was now just a voice on the other end of the phone, a reminder of a life I had left behind. Later, Laura called me. I heard about John and his mom. Are you okay? I smiled, feeling a sense of peace. Yeah, I'm more than okay. I'm free, Laura. Truly free. As I ended the call, I looked around my small apartment, my sanctuary. It was a far cry from the life I had with John, but it was real, it was mine. I had faced the worst and come out stronger. That night, I realized that this was my new beginning. A life where I was in control, where my happiness didn't depend on someone else. I had lost much, but in the process, I had found myself.
I never thought juggling cameras, kids, and a calendar crammed with appointments would be my daily circus. But here I am, at 39, a freelance photographer with a life that's always a click away from chaos. My name's Sarah, and my world revolves around two things: my camera lens and my family. My husband, Mike, is the kind of guy who's married to his job. He works as a sales rep for a company with branches across 3 cities. I can't remember the last time we had a meal together without him rushing off or being glued to his laptop. And then, there are our kids, Lily and Max, both in school, and a whirlwind of activities and homework. Mama, have you seen my math book? Lily's voice snaps me back from my thoughts as I sort through my camera gear. It's probably under the pile of clothes in your room, I reply, without looking up. Max runs in, his soccer ball thumping against the walls. Mom, can you sign this form for my field trip? Sure, bud. Just give me a minute, I say, balancing a camera in one hand and the form in the other. As the kids dash off to their rooms, I hear the front door open and close. Mike's home, probably just to grab something and dash off again. His presence in the house has become like a cameo appearance in a long-running show. Hey, Mike, how was your day? I ask, not expecting much of a conversation. Same old, just tired. Got another trip tomorrow, he says, barely looking up from his phone. I was thinking maybe this weekend we could do something as a family. You know, take the kids out or something, I suggest, hoping for a change. Yeah, maybe. I'll see how it goes, he replies, his attention still on his phone. I sigh, realizing it's a lost cause. It's always maybe or we'll see. The kids and I have become experts at filling in the blanks of his absence. The evening rolls on with the usual routine: dinner, homework, bedtime stories, and finally, some quiet. I sit on the porch, my camera by my side, capturing the night sky. It's my moment of peace, a brief escape from the relentless pace of life. But who am I kidding? Even in these quiet moments, my mind races with tomorrow's to-do list, unanswered emails, and the ever-looming question, when will things change? As I head back inside, I make a mental note to check my schedule for next week. It's a balancing act, and I'm the ringmaster of my own chaotic circus. But in this hustle and bustle, I often wonder, when did life become a series of tasks to tick off rather than moments to live? Life as a freelance photographer is never predictable, but nothing prepared me for the curveball I was about to receive. It was just another Wednesday morning, and I was out for a walk with our dog, Buster. The sun was shining, but my mind was cloudy with thoughts of upcoming projects and deadlines. Come on, Buster, let's make this quick. Mommy's got a ton of editing to do, I muttered, tugging slightly at his leash. Just as we turned the corner near the park, Buster spotted a cat, and in a split second, everything went haywire. He lunged forward, pulling the leash with such force that I lost my balance and fell hard onto the pavement. Ow! Buster, stop! I yelled, but he was too busy chasing the cat to notice. I tried to get up, but a sharp pain shot through my leg. Great, just what I needed. Limping back home, I called Mike. "Hey, I think I hurt my leg. Can you come home early?" "Sarah, I'm in a meeting. Can it wait?" His voice was curt, a clear sign of his irritation. "I just fell, Mike. It's not like I'm calling for fun," I snapped, frustration boiling over. "Fine, I'll see what I can do," he replied, and the line went dead. After what felt like an eternity, I made it home. The pain was getting worse. I knew I had to see a doctor, but with Mike's unpredictable schedule and the kids at school, it was a logistical nightmare. The diagnosis was a fractured leg. Great. Just what I needed on top of everything else. The doctor advised rest, meaning no shoots, no chasing after the kids, nothing. As if my life wasn't chaotic enough. Back home, with my leg in a cast, I felt like a bird trapped in a cage. Mike had to take over some of my duties, which he did with an obvious lack of enthusiasm. "This is a real mess, Sarah. How long till you're back on your feet?" Mike asked, his tone more concerned with the inconvenience than my pain. "A few weeks at least. It's not like I planned this, you know," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. The kids were surprisingly helpful, though. Lily took over some of the house chores, and Max tried his best to be less of a tornado around the house. "Mom, can I get you anything?" Lily asked, her concern genuine. "Just some peace would be nice," I replied with a tired smile. Days turned into weeks. I was stuck at home, my world reduced to the four walls of our living room. Mike was out most of the time, and the kids were busy with school. The loneliness was suffocating. In a desperate attempt to find something to occupy my time, I decided to explore photography forums online. Little did I know, this decision would turn my world upside down. Stuck at home with my leg in a cast, I found myself diving deeper into the world of online photography forums. It was a nice distraction, scrolling through endless galleries of beautiful images. It almost made me forget the throbbing pain in my leg. Almost. One evening, while mindlessly browsing, something caught my eye. A photo of a man proposing to a young woman. The scene was picturesque, but it wasn't the romantic setting that grabbed my attention. It was the man in the photo. He looked exactly like Mike, my husband. Same build, same hair, even the same suit that I had bought him last Christmas. "No, this can't be," I murmured to myself, my heart pounding. "It just looks like him, that's all." But the more I looked at it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling. It was more than just a resemblance. I had to know more. I messaged the photographer, a woman named Jenna. "Hi Jenna, I came across your photo of the marriage proposal. Can you tell me more about it? Where was it taken?" Jenna replied quickly. "Sure, that was taken in Riverdale. Lovely couple. Why do you ask?" I hesitated, not sure how to explain without sounding paranoid. "I was just curious. The man in the photo looks a lot like someone I know." I waited anxiously for her response, hoping she'd offer more information. But instead, she went silent. No reply came. Days passed, and the image haunted me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time Mike came home, I studied his face, looking for any sign of guilt, any hint of betrayal. But he was his usual detached self, buried in his phone or laptop. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him. "Mike, have you ever been to Riverdale on your business trips?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, a few times. Why?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "No reason. Just asking," I said, my voice trembling. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I had to know. I messaged Jenna again, this time more directly. "Jenna, I need to know. The man in your proposal photo, can you send me more shots of him? I think he might be my husband." This time, Jenna responded, "I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's against my policy to share personal photos without my client's consent." I pleaded, explaining my situation and my growing suspicions. After what felt like an eternity, Jenna finally relented. "Okay, I understand. I'll send you a few more shots, but please keep this between us." When the photos arrived, my heart sank. There he was, my Mike, down on one knee, holding a ring to a woman I had never seen before. The same loving gaze he once gave me was now directed at her. I sat there, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. My world, my marriage, everything I believed in, shattered in an instant. I never imagined myself in the role of a woman who'd hire a private detective. Yet, there I was, sitting across from Rick, a seasoned investigator with a face that didn't give anything away. I handed him photos of Mike and a list of cities he frequently visited. "I need to know what he's doing on these trips," I said, my voice a strange mix of fear and resolve. Rick nodded, his eyes scanning the photos. "I'll track his movements, see who he meets, but it's going to take some time. You okay with that?" I was far from okay, but I nodded. "I need the truth," was all I could muster. As Rick delved into his investigation, I was forced into a role I never wanted, the wife who pretends everything is normal. Mike, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued his business trips, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I started noticing changes in Mike that I'd never seen before. His wardrobe underwent a transformation, suits that screamed designer labels, shoes that weren't from our usual budget stores. His cologne was different too, replaced by a scent that was more refined, more luxurious. These were subtle changes, but to me, they were glaring. Then there were the phone calls. Mike had always been private with his phone, but now it was excessive. He'd lock himself in the bathroom, speaking in hushed tones. I once pressed my ear against the door, trying to catch snippets of his conversation, but all I could hear was the muffled sound of his voice. I watched him closely, trying to find traces of the man I married in his new persona. But with every passing day, he seemed more like a stranger. I wondered how long he had been living this double life, right under my nose. The kids started to notice the tension. Lily, ever perceptive, asked one night, "Mom, is everything okay with you and Dad?" I forced a smile. "Everything's fine, sweetie. Just a lot on my mind with work." But it wasn't fine. The man I shared my bed with, the father of my children, felt like a mirage. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, piecing together the lies and half-truths. One evening, as Mike prepared for another trip, I found myself watching him pack. He moved with such ease, a routine he had mastered. There was no hesitation, no signs of guilt. It struck me then, how easy it is to deceive someone who trusts you completely. I reflected on our years together, wondering when the lies began. Had I been naive, too trusting? Or had I chosen to ignore the signs, too wrapped up in my own world? Weeks went by, and Rick finally called. "We need to meet." His voice was serious, carrying a weight that made my heart sink. We met at a quiet corner of a nearly empty cafe. He slid a thick envelope across the table. "I found quite a bit. You sure you're ready for this?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded. Inside the envelope were photos, receipts, and detailed reports. Every piece of evidence was like a knife twisting in my heart. There he was, my Mike, but not the Mike I knew. In each city, there was a different woman, a different life. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. My mind raced with questions. How could he do this? How long had he been living this lie? I paid Rick, barely speaking as I left. Walking home, the envelope felt like it weighed a ton. I realized then that all this while, I had been living with my eyes closed. I had refused to see the man Mike had become, clinging to the image of the husband I thought I knew. Now, with my eyes wide open, I saw everything clearly. The lies, the deceit, the reality of my marriage laid bare. It was a truth I couldn't run from anymore. Holding on to the truth about Mike's infidelities was like keeping a storm inside me. But I kept the photos a secret. I wasn't going to let him off easy. No, he deserved more than just a confrontation. He deserved a reckoning. I wanted to give him an unpleasant surprise, one that he'd remember for the rest of his life. As the days passed, my leg finally healed. I could walk without wincing in pain, a small victory that felt like a fresh start. But as one part of me healed, another part plotted revenge. Mike continued his routine, unaware of the storm brewing under his nose. He left for his trips and came back, slipping further into his web of lies. He thought he was smart, but he didn't know that I was now playing the game too. I crafted a plan, something that would expose his deceit in the most dramatic way possible. I wasn't going to tip my hand by letting him know what I knew. No, this had to be a surprise. I spent hours thinking, planning, making sure every detail was perfect. I watched him, pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was counting down the days. My heart had turned cold, each beat a reminder of his betrayal. Finally, everything was in place. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment. Mike was oblivious, still wrapped up in his lies, thinking he had fooled me. He had no idea what was coming. As I lay in bed that night, the phrase, "Revenge is a dish best served cold," echoed in my mind. I realized that was exactly what I was doing, serving him his just desserts, cold and unyielding. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about taking back my life from someone who thought he could play me for a fool. The night I planned to confront Mike was etched in my mind like a date with destiny. I cooked his favorite meal, set the table with our best china, and even put on the dress he always said he liked. It was all a facade, a stage set for the final act. Mike walked in, looking tired but surprised at the effort I'd put in. "Wow, what's all this for?" he asked, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Just felt like doing something special," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. We sat down, and for a while, I played the part of the doting wife. We talked about mundane things, but I was just biding my time, waiting for the right moment. The doorbell rang, and that was my cue. "Can you get that, honey?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Mike got up, still unsuspecting, and walked to the door. I heard his footsteps, the door opening, and then a moment of silence before his voice, laced with shock. "What are you doing here?" I walked to the doorway, and there they were, the girl from the photos and her parents. The look on Mike's face was priceless, a mix of shock, fear, and confusion. "Sarah, what is this?" Mike turned to me, his voice a mix of accusation and panic. "This is me, giving you a taste of your own medicine," I said, my voice cold and sharp. The girl, tears in her eyes, confronted Mike. "You said you loved me, that we were going to be together." Her parents were furious, demanding answers, their voices raised in anger. Mike tried to speak, but words seemed to fail him. "You've been living a lie, Mike, and I have all the proof," I said, holding up the envelope Rick had given me. Mike's face went from red to pale. He looked at me, then at the girl and her parents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're a liar and a cheat," I spat out, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The room was filled with shouting, accusations flying. Mike tried to explain, to apologize, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As the girl and her parents left, the reality of what had just happened seemed to sink in for Mike. He looked at me, his eyes searching for something, maybe forgiveness or understanding. But all I felt was disgust. "You need to leave," I said, my voice void of emotion. He didn't argue, just packed a few things and left. The house was suddenly quiet, the echoes of the confrontation still hanging in the air. The days following the confrontation were a blur. The house, once filled with the noise of our family, now echoed with a haunting silence. I kept busy, trying to distract myself from the emptiness and the hurt. Lily and Max knew something was wrong. They could sense the change in the air, the absence of their father's presence. I sat them down one evening, knowing I had to explain things, even if it broke my heart. "Kids, your dad and I, we're going to be living apart for a while," I said, my voice trembling. "Why, Mom? Did we do something wrong?" Max's innocent eyes searched mine for answers. "No, honey, it's not you. It's just, Dad made some mistakes and we need some time apart," I tried to explain without revealing too much. Lily, older and more perceptive, understood more than I wished she would. "Is Dad not coming back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, sweetheart," I replied, holding back my own tears. I started the divorce proceedings, a process that was both liberating and soul-crushing. Mike tried to reach out, sending messages of apology, of wanting to talk. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The legal battles began. I fought for the house, for alimony, for everything we had built together. It was a messy, painful process, but I was determined to get what we deserved. One day, I was going through some old boxes and found a photo of Mike and me on our wedding day. I stared at it, at the happy, hopeful faces we once were. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Why did he do it, Mom? Why did Dad hurt us?" Max asked, coming into the room. I put the photo down, looking at my son. "Sometimes people make bad choices, Max, and those choices hurt the people they love." "But do you still love Dad?" he asked, his eyes full of confusion. I sighed, a mix of sadness and resignation in my heart. "I don't know, Max. I'm just trying to figure out what's best for us now." The weeks turned into months. The divorce was finalized, leaving me with a mix of relief and a deep sense of loss. I started focusing more on my photography, taking on more assignments. It was a way to rebuild, to find myself again. One evening, Lily came to me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I hugged her, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "Yes, we are. We're going to be just fine." Life didn't stop after the divorce. If anything, it kept moving at a relentless pace. The kids and I settled into a new routine, finding our footing in this altered reality. We were a team, the three of us, facing each day with a mix of resilience and hope. As for Mike, I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. His world, it seemed, was unraveling at the seams. The women he deceived banded together, filing a collective lawsuit against him. The scandal spilled over into his work, leading to a demotion. He was drowning in debts and legal troubles. But that part of my life was behind me. I had more pressing, more pleasant things to focus on. One sunny afternoon, while I was setting up for a family photo shoot in a park, Lily called me. Her voice was bright, filled with excitement. "Mom, guess what? I won first place in the art competition." "That's wonderful, Lily. I'm so proud of you," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Max, too, was thriving. He had found a passion for soccer and was making new friends on the team. "Mom, you should come to my game this Saturday. I might score a goal," he said one evening, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Life with the kids was busy, filled with school events, soccer matches, and art exhibitions. We were a tight unit, supporting each other through thick and thin. My photography business was also picking up. I landed a few big contracts, photographing events, and doing portrait sessions. The lens was my window to the world, allowing me to capture moments of joy, of life moving forward. One evening, as I sat editing photos, I reflected on the past months. The pain of betrayal, the turmoil of the divorce. It all seemed like a distant memory now. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was my friend and neighbor Martha, dropping by with some coffee and a friendly smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked as we sat in the living room. "I'm doing okay, actually. Better than okay," I replied, a sense of contentment washing over me. "That's great to hear. You know, you've really inspired me with your strength," Martha said, her eyes sincere. We chatted for a while, talking about work, life, and everything in between. It was nice to have a friend who understood my journey. As Martha left, I looked around my home, filled with laughter, love, and the evidence of a life moving forward. The hardships had not defined us. Instead, they had forged us into something stronger. Life was good, not perfect, but good. And for now, that was more than enough. My name is Rebecca, and I'm an artist. Not the kind you see in fancy galleries, but the kind who spends her days in a modest charity center, painting with kids who've seen more than they should. I've always believed that art can heal, and every day I see it happen with these children. I live with my husband, Mark, a sales manager who's always chasing the next big deal, and his mother, Martha, who's never seen a reason to hold back her opinion. Our home is a constant buzz of Mark's phone calls and Martha's TV shows. It's not easy, but it's life. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I decided to share some exciting news. Mark, Martha, I entered some of my paintings and the kids' artwork in a city contest. The prize is $100,000. Mark, scrolling through his phone, didn't even look up. "That's nice, Rebecca, but let's be real. What are the chances?" Martha snorted. "With those street kids' drawings? You're dreaming, dear." I tried to explain. It's not just about the prize, it's about showing what these kids can do, how they express their... Mark cut me off. Rebecca, why don't you find a real job? Something that actually pays? I sighed, looking at my half-chopped vegetables. It's important to me, Mark. This job, these kids, they matter. Moreover, my salary at the center is quite enough to pay bills and food. Martha waved a dismissive hand. We need real money, Rebecca, not child's play. I finished dinner in silence. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and disappointment. I believed in my dream, in the magic of art, and maybe, just maybe, the contest could be a new beginning. But at home, it felt like my dreams were nothing but whispers in a storm. I closed my eyes, picturing the colorful, chaotic art room at the center, the place where my heart felt fullest. Tomorrow, I'd go back there, to my little haven of paints and smiles, away from the doubts and the cold reality of my home life. This contest, it was more than a chance for money. It was a chance to prove to myself, and maybe to Mark and Martha, that what I do is valuable, that it has the power to change lives. And with that thought, I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of vibrant colors and the sound of children's laughter. Each day at the Charity Center was a journey into a world where paint and canvas became tools of transformation. There, surrounded by children who had seen the darker side of life, I found my purpose. We painted murals together, walls turned into vibrant stories of hope, each brushstroke a testament to their resilience. I remember one afternoon, a shy little boy, Timmy, who had never picked up a brush before, created a bright sun with rays stretching across the wall. His smile, as he stepped back to admire his work, was brighter than the sun he'd painted. Moments like these were my daily reminders of why I did what I did. But at home, the story was starkly different. One evening, I returned home, still carrying the joy of the day's achievements. Eager to share, I approached Mark and Martha in the living room. Mark, look at this, I said, showing him a picture of the mural. Timmy painted this sun. He's never drawn anything before. Mark glanced at the photo and then back at his phone. That's nice, but it's just a drawing, Rebecca. Kids doodle all the time. Frustration welled up inside me. It's not just a doodle, Mark. It's a big step for him. He's been through so much. Martha cut in sharply. Rebecca, when will you stop playing therapist with paint? It's a child's drawing, nothing more. You need to start living in the real world. Her words felt like a slap. It's not just playing, Martha. These kids, they find a voice through their art. It's healing for them. Mark let out an exasperated sigh. Healing? What about our mortgage, Rebecca? Your healing isn't going to cover it. You need a real job. I clenched my fists, trying to control the rising tide of anger and hurt. This is a real job, Mark. It's making a difference. Martha snorted. Difference? What difference does it make when I'm ashamed to tell my friends where you work? You need to wake up and see reality, Rebecca. I stood there, words failing me. The gap between my world at the center and my world at home had never felt so vast. In one, I was helping to rebuild lives. In the other, I was constantly reminded of my supposed inadequacy. That night, in the solitude of my studio, I stared at the blank canvas. The harsh words from earlier echoed in my mind, drowning out the laughter and joy of the day. I picked up my brush, and with each stroke, I tried to paint away the hurt, the doubt, and the feeling of being undervalued. The day was winding down at the Charity Center, the walls echoing with the lingering laughter of children. I was cleaning up the paints when my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Hello, Rebecca Thompson speaking, I answered. Miss Thompson, this is John Harris from the City Arts Council. Congratulations, you've won our citywide art contest. The prize is $100,000. We'll be in touch soon for further details and discuss an additional opportunity to collaborate with the city. The news hit me like a wave. I won? My voice trembled with a mix of shock and joy. Yes, indeed. Your and the children's work truly stood out, John replied, his voice warm with genuine admiration. I thanked him profusely and hung up, my heart racing. This was beyond my wildest dreams, a validation of our efforts, of the children's talent, and in some way of my own. I shared the news with the children, and their reaction was heartwarming. Their cheers and claps filled the room with an energy that was almost tangible. This was our collective victory. Later, as the center quieted down, I sat with Lisa, the psychologist, over a cup of tea. I shared my apprehensions about breaking the news at home. Mark and his mother have never really seen the value in what I do. They might just see the money, I confided. Lisa leaned forward, her eyes thoughtful. Why not test their reaction? See if this win changes their attitude. It might reveal their true colors. Her suggestion struck a chord. At home, my work had always been trivialized, its impact constantly undermined. This win, this significant recognition, could indeed be the litmus test for their genuine sentiments. I pondered over Lisa's advice as I made my way home. The idea was both unsettling and necessary. If the money swayed their attitudes, it would uncover the uncomfortable truth about their regard for me and my work. Stepping into the house that evening, I decided to hold off on sharing the news just yet. I wanted to observe, to plan my approach carefully. Lisa's words echoed in my mind, and I knew she was right. It was time to find out the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. I went to bed that night with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I was sure of Mark's love, or at least I wanted to be. But Lisa's proposal was an opportunity to see beyond my hopes, to understand the reality of my home life. I agreed with her. It was a test worth taking. That evening, I decided it was time to put my plan into action. Sitting at the dinner table with Mark and Martha, I took a deep breath and said, I have something to tell you. I won the city art contest. The prize is $100,000. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Mark's fork dropped to his plate with a clatter, and Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. $100,000? Rebecca, that's incredible, Mark exclaimed, his usual indifference replaced by a surprising enthusiasm. Martha, who had always been quick with a critical word about my job, suddenly softened. Dear, that's wonderful news. We're so proud of you, she said, her tone unusually warm. During the meal, Martha fussed over me more than she ever had, offering me the best pieces of chicken and constantly refilling my glass. Mark, too, was uncharacteristically attentive, asking about my artwork and the contest in detail. Their newfound affection was overwhelming, almost suffocating. I noticed them exchanging glances, a silent communication that I couldn't decipher. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the usual cold, dismissive atmosphere had transformed into one of exaggerated warmth and interest. Later that evening, I stepped out of my room to get a glass of water and overheard a hushed conversation coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly moved closer. We can finally redo the kitchen like we wanted, I heard Martha say in a hushed tone. And get that new car. We deserve it after all, Mark added, his voice laced with greed. There was a pause before Martha spoke again. Once we have the money, we can think about... Well, Rebecca doesn't really need to stay here anymore, does she? My heart sank as I listened. Their words were like daggers, revealing their true intentions. The affection at dinner wasn't for me. It was for the money. They were already planning to spend my winnings on themselves and even discussing getting rid of me. I quietly retreated to my room, their words echoing in my ears. The test had revealed their true colors, and they were darker than I had imagined. I lay in bed, a mix of hurt and clarity washing over me. This was not the love and support of a family. It was opportunism, plain and simple. As I closed my eyes, the weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on my heart. The truth was out, and now I had to decide what to do with it. The morning air was tense as I sat down for breakfast with Mark and Martha. The news I was about to break would surely stir the pot, but I was determined to see it through. Casually, I started, I've decided what to do with the contest money. They both perked up, leaning in with a keen interest that had been absent before. I'm donating the entire $100,000 to the charity center, I said, watching their faces for reaction. The response was immediate and explosive. What? Mark slammed his hand on the table, his face red with anger. Are you out of your mind, Rebecca? Martha's voice was shrill, filled with disbelief and outrage. "You're giving away our ticket to a comfortable life? You foolish girl." I remained calm, though their words stung. "It's not our money. It's mine, and those kids need it more than we do." Mark's voice was laced with scorn. "This is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. You're a fool, Rebecca." Martha's anger bubbled over, her words harsh and unfiltered. "You've always been a disgrace, pretending to be some saint with those street kids. And now this? Throwing away a fortune?" I tried to explain. "It's not throwing it away. It's helping children who have nothing." But Mark was relentless. "It's not just about the money. You've always been this way, naive and foolish. I should have seen it sooner. I was planning to wait, spend the money first, but now? Now I want a divorce, Rebecca. I can't be with someone who throws away opportunities like this." His words cut through me, but they also brought clarity. This was the reality of our marriage, stripped of any pretense. I looked at them both, my decision firm. If that's how you feel, then it's clear to me now. This marriage, this relationship, was never about us. It was about convenience, about money. Without another word, I stood up and walked away from the table, away from the vitriol and greed. Their shouts and insults followed me, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. I had seen the truth, and it had set me free. The days following my announcement were cold and quiet. The house felt more like a battleground than a home. Mark and Martha avoided me, their disappointment and anger hanging in the air like a thick fog. I was packing some of my belongings in the bedroom when Mark walked in. His face was hard, his eyes void of the warmth I once knew. "So, you're really doing this? Throwing away our life for some charity?" he asked, his voice edged with bitterness. "I'm not throwing away our life, Mark. I'm choosing to do what's right with my money," I replied, folding a sweater into my suitcase. He let out a harsh laugh. "Your money? It was supposed to be our ticket out of here, Rebecca, and you just gave it away like it was nothing." "It was never about the money for me, Mark. It's about helping those kids, something you never understood." His frustration boiled over. "You're so blinded by your so-called mission that you can't see the real world. You're a dreamer, Rebecca, and dreamers don't survive." I zipped up my suitcase, feeling the finality of the moment. "Maybe that's the difference between us, Mark. I dream of making a difference, while you dream of money." Mark's face tightened. "You know what, Rebecca? Maybe it's better this way. I can't be with someone who doesn't see reality. I want a divorce." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. "If that's what you want, Mark." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You were always a fool, Rebecca. I just didn't see it until now." After he left the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of his words sinking in. The love I thought we had was overshadowed by greed and misunderstanding. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, Martha didn't even look at me. Her disdain was clear, her silence louder than any words. Stepping out of the house, I felt a sense of relief mixed with sorrow. The chapter of my life with Mark and Martha had closed, but ahead of me was a path of my own making. I got into the taxi, glancing back at the house one last time. This wasn't just an end, it was a beginning of a life where I could be true to myself and my dreams, free from the chains of greed and misunderstanding. The day to sign the divorce papers arrived with a mix of relief and finality. I walked into the lawyer's office, feeling a sense of purpose. Mark was there, and to my surprise, Martha accompanied him. Their presence together was a stark reminder of the life I was leaving behind. As we sat down, Martha didn't waste any time. "You're making a huge mistake, Rebecca. Throwing away a marriage over some charity money," she hissed, her tone laced with disdain. "And how do you plan to survive? With your tiny salary? You can't even afford a decent place to live," she continued, her words sharp and biting. Mark sat silently, casting contemptuous glances at me. I listened to Martha's tirade, feeling a strange detachment. Their words no longer had the power to hurt me. Once the paperwork was done, and it was time to leave, I turned to them, a smile playing on my lips. "You know, I was just testing you," I said, their confused looks fueling my confidence. "Testing us?" Mark echoed, puzzled. "Yes, I wanted to see how you'd react if I said I was donating all the money, and you both showed your true colors." Martha's face contorted in confusion. "What are you saying?" "I'm not giving all the money to charity. That was a lie. And the city? They've given me several lucrative projects. I'm going to be just fine," I said, the satisfaction of revealing the truth making my words strong and clear. The color drained from Mark's face, and Martha's mouth hung open in shock. Their reaction was everything I had expected and more. Mark suddenly found his voice, desperation seeping through. "Rebecca, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. Can we start over?" I looked at him, once my husband, now a stranger begging for a second chance. "No, Mark, we can't. You showed me who you really are, and I have no desire to be with someone like that." Turning to Martha, I added, "And you, Martha, should know that money isn't everything. What I do, my work, it matters more than any luxury you crave." Without another word, I walked out of the office, leaving them behind in their shock and disbelief. I walked into the sunlight, feeling lighter and more confident than I had in years. The divorce was the end of a painful chapter, but it was also the beginning of something new. A chapter where I was the author of my own story, unburdened by others' greed and deception. It was a freedom hard-earned and well-deserved. The months following my separation from Mark and Martha unfolded like a series of vibrant brushstrokes on a once blank canvas. I found myself immersed in a new rhythm of life, one that echoed with the sounds of children's laughter at the charity center and the quiet concentration of my work on city projects. My world, once confined to the expectations and criticisms of a household that didn't understand me, had expanded into a realm where my passion for art and my dedication to helping others were not just acknowledged, but celebrated. I had rented a small apartment in a quaint part of town. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, a sanctuary where the walls were adorned with my paintings and the cheerful artwork of the children from the center. Each piece told a story, a reminder of the journey I had embarked on and the lives that had intertwined with mine. The decision to donate half of my prize money to the charity center had set a series of unexpected events in motion. The local newspapers and community blogs picked up the story, intrigued by the artist who chose charity over personal gain. My phone began ringing with inquiries and offers. Local gallery owners, once indifferent, were now eager to showcase my work. My paintings, which had been a source of solace in my darkest times, were now being admired in well-lit galleries, appreciated by people who saw in them the same hope and beauty that I did. The city projects, too, brought a newfound recognition. I was commissioned to design murals for public spaces, transforming bland walls into tapestries of color and life. Each project was a new adventure, an opportunity to leave a mark on the city that had become my larger canvas. In the midst of this newfound success, I occasionally received messages from Mark. His texts, laden with apologies and pleas for a second chance, were a stark reminder of the life I had left behind. I read them, sometimes with a mocking smile, but mostly with a sense of detachment. The pain he had caused was a part of my past, a chapter that had closed the day I walked out of that house. His words, once capable of cutting me deeply, now seemed superficial, like ripples on the surface of a lake that could not disturb its depths. Evenings in my apartment were a time of reflection and creativity. I would often sit by the window, a cup of tea in hand, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the twists and turns my life had taken. The betrayal and hurt had been a crucible, burning away the illusions and leaving behind a clarity of purpose. I realized I had found strength in my vulnerability, courage in facing the unknown, and an unshakable belief in the power of art to heal and transform. On weekends, I conducted art workshops at the charity center. The children, each with their own story of resilience, continued to be my greatest inspiration. We painted together, our collective imagination turning blank canvases into expressions of joy, pain, and hope. I saw in their eyes the reflection of my own journey, a testament to the healing power of art. As the city embraced my work, my personal life, too, began to flourish in new ways. I made friends in the art community, a group of eclectic and supportive individuals who appreciated me for who I was. We shared stories, laughed, and dreamed together. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of belonging. One evening, As I finished a painting for an upcoming exhibition, I stepped back to take it all in. The vibrant colors on the canvas, the sense of accomplishment, the peace that filled my heart. It was a far cry from the days of doubt and belittlement. I had emerged from the shadows of a stifling relationship into the light of self-discovery and fulfillment. As I closed the lights that night and settled into bed, I thought about the future. It was unwritten, full of unknowns, but I was no longer afraid. I had weathered the storm and found my rainbow on the other side. My story was one of transformation, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is the potential for a masterpiece, and I was just getting started. I always believed that if you worked hard enough, life would eventually reward you. I guess that's what made me Miranda Thompson, top of my class in law school and engaged to the love of my life, Michael. He was everything I thought I wanted, smart, charming, and ambitious. We met in a constitutional law class, and it didn't take long for our study sessions to turn into late-night talks about our future together. "Can you believe it, Miranda? In just a week, you'll be Mrs. Miranda Richardson," Michael said, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he wrapped his arms around me. I laughed, leaning into his embrace. "I still can't believe you convinced me to take your last name, but yes, I can't wait." But beneath the surface of our perfect little world, there were cracks. My mom, Linda, remarried when I was just a toddler, and my stepdad, Greg, was the only father figure I knew. My biological dad, Dr. James Thompson, was a big shot in the medical world, but just a shadow in my life. We talked occasionally, and he sent gifts on my birthdays, but that was it. Mom made it clear she didn't want him around, and I never pushed it. As the wedding day approached, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness that he wouldn't be there. "You okay, honey?" my mom asked, noticing my distant look as we went over the seating chart. "Yeah, I wish Dad could be here," I admitted, referring to my biological father. Linda sighed, her expression hardening. "Miranda, we've been over this. Your stepfather has been more of a dad to you than James ever was. Let's not ruin your big day by bringing up the past." I nodded, not wanting to argue. It was easier that way. My stepsister Sarah was the complete opposite of me. At 20, she was the wild child, always seeking attention, especially from Greg and Mom. They doted on her, and I often felt like an afterthought. "Are you seriously still moping about Daddy not coming? Grow up, Miranda," Sarah chided, rolling her eyes as she walked into the room. "Sarah, that's enough," Linda scolded, but her tone was gentle, almost indulgent. The day before the wedding, the tension was palpable. Michael seemed distant, and Sarah was unusually smug. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was off. "Hey, are you sure you're okay?" I asked Michael as we were setting up the venue. He forced a smile. "Just pre-wedding jitters, babe. Everything's going to be perfect." I wanted to believe him, but something in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. I wish I had listened to that feeling. The day I had been dreaming of since I was a little girl had finally arrived. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and everything seemed perfect. I stood in front of the mirror, my wedding dress hugging every curve perfectly. "You look beautiful, Miranda," my mom said, her voice soft, a rare moment of tenderness between us. "Thanks, Mom. I just wish Dad could see me," I replied, feeling a familiar ache in my heart. "You have us, Miranda. That's enough," she said, her tone firm, as if closing the topic for good. The ceremony was like something out of a fairy tale. I walked down the aisle, my heart pounding with excitement. Michael stood there, looking handsome as ever, but his eyes, they didn't have the usual warmth. I pushed the thought away, convincing myself it was just nerves. As we stood facing each other, the officiant began, "Do you, Michael Richardson, take Miranda Thompson to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Before Michael could respond, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. It was Sarah, her eyes wild, her face flushed. "Stop! Stop the wedding!" she yelled, her voice echoing through the silent hall. Everyone turned, stunned. I felt like the ground was slipping away beneath me. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She looked at me, then at Michael, a twisted smile on her face. "I'm pregnant, Miranda, and Michael is the father." The room erupted into chaos. My mom and Greg rushed toward Sarah while I stood there, frozen. "Is this true, Michael?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Miranda. I didn't mean for this to happen. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The world spun around me. Sorry? You destroy our future and all you can say is sorry? I spat, my voice rising. My mom came to me, her expression stern. "Miranda, calm down. We need to handle this sensibly." Calm down? My fiancé cheated on me with my sister, and you want me to calm down? I couldn't believe her words. "Miranda, it's a complicated situation. Michael is a decent man. He wants to take responsibility for the child," Greg added. "A decent man? A decent man doesn't cheat on his fiancée with her sister." I shot back, my anger boiling over. The guests murmured among themselves, some looking at me with pity, others with judgment. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of the hall, the sound of my wedding dress tearing as I pushed through the doors. That day, my dream wedding turned into a nightmare. The betrayal by Michael and Sarah was a harsh blow, but the lack of support from my own family was a stab to the heart. It was clear where their loyalties lay, and it wasn't with me. The morning after the wedding that never was felt surreal. I woke up in my childhood room, the white dress, now stained and torn, a painful reminder of the debacle. My phone was overflowing with messages and missed calls, but I ignored them all. I couldn't face the world, not yet. I could hear my mom and Greg talking downstairs, their voices a low hum. I had no desire to join them. The way they had sided with Sarah and Michael was a betrayal I couldn't digest. I decided then and there that I needed a fresh start, away from all this mess. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I knew by heart, but seldom called. "Dad?" I said hesitantly when the call connected. "Miranda? Is everything okay?" His voice was laced with concern. "Dad, The wedding didn't happen. I need to get away from here. Can I come stay with you?" I asked, my voice breaking. There was a brief pause. "Of course, Miranda. Come as soon as you can," he replied, his tone reassuring. Packing was a blur. I threw clothes and essentials into a suitcase, not caring about the order. When I went downstairs, suitcase in tow, my mom looked up, startled. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I'm leaving, Mom. I can't stay here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't just run away from your problems, Miranda," Greg chimed in, his expression disapproving. "This isn't running away. It's choosing not to stay where I'm clearly not wanted," I countered, my resolve firm. My mom's face softened slightly. "Miranda, we're your family. You belong here." "You made your choice, Mom. Now I'm making mine," I said, turning towards the door. The drive to my dad's city was long and gave me plenty of time to think. I felt a mix of fear, excitement, and uncertainty. Starting over wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. When I arrived, my dad was waiting at the door. He looked older than I remembered. "Miranda, I'm so sorry about what happened," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Thanks, Dad. I just need to figure things out. Start fresh," I replied, grateful for his support. Over the next few days, Dad helped me settle in. He even introduced me to an old friend of his, Mr. Anderson, who ran a prestigious law firm in the city. "Miranda's an excellent lawyer. She graduated top of her class," Dad boasted during the introduction. Mr. Anderson looked at me, his eyes assessing. "We could use someone like you in our team. Why don't you come in for an interview next week?" I was taken aback by the offer, but managed a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I'd like that." As I started to rebuild my life in this new city, I realized that sometimes the worst things in life can lead you to where you truly belong. I was ready to face whatever came my way with a new sense of determination and hope. I had been working at Anderson and Amp, associates, for about 6 months when it happened. My life was finally on track, and I was slowly regaining my confidence. That's when Michael Richardson, of all people, walked into the office. I was at my desk, buried in case files, when I heard his all-too-familiar voice. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Richardson, the new associate." My head snapped up, and our eyes met. He looked as shocked to see me as I was to see him. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "I was hired last week. I didn't know you worked here." Mr. Anderson, oblivious to the tension, clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Miranda, meet Michael, our new star. You two should get along well, both top of your classes." I forced a smile, feeling like I was going to be sick. "Nice to meet you, Michael," I lied. As the days went by, working with Michael became my new reality. I avoided him as much as possible, but it was hard in the small office space. Then, one day, he cornered me in the break room. "Miranda, we need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, trying to move past him. He blocked my way. "Please, hear me out. I'm sorry for everything." "Sorry doesn't change what happened, Michael. You ruined everything," I said, my voice rising. "I know, and I regret it every day. But you need to know, Sarah lost the baby because of the stress from the wedding. She can't have children now." "That's on you," he accused. I stared at him, incredulous. "On me? You cheat on me, and somehow it's my fault? You're unbelievable." Michael's face hardened. "You could have handled it better. You didn't have to run away." I laughed bitterly. "Handled it better? You destroyed my life, Michael. You and Sarah. Don't you dare put that on me." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't want to hear it. I pushed past him and left the room. The nerve of him, blaming me for his and Sarah's actions. It was like a slap in the face, a reminder of the pain and humiliation I had gone through. As I sat back at my desk, trying to calm my racing heart, I realized this was just the beginning. Working with Michael was going to be a challenge, but I was determined not to let him get to me. I had come too far to be dragged down by his guilt and manipulations. The annual corporate party at Anderson and Amp Associates was something I had been looking forward to, a chance to let loose and celebrate our hard work. That was until I found out Michael and his sister Sarah would be there. I had managed to avoid Sarah since the disaster of a wedding, and the thought of facing her now twisted my stomach into knots. I arrived at the party dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, hoping to blend into the background. The atmosphere was lively, with music playing and colleagues laughing. I was grabbing a drink when I heard a familiar, grating voice. "Well, well, if it isn't the runaway bride," Sarah sneered, sidling up to me with a glass of champagne in her hand. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" "Oh, Michael invited me. After all, I am family," she said, her eyes scanning me up and down. I clenched my jaw. "I'm not going to let you ruin this night for me." Sarah laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "I already ruined your life, didn't I? Or should I say, you ruined it yourself with your little tantrum." Before I could respond, Michael joined us, his expression tense. "Sarah, let's not do this here." "Oh, come on, Michael. Let's see if Miranda can handle the truth for once," Sarah taunted. Michael turned to me, his eyes cold. "You should leave, Miranda. You're not wanted here." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. This is my workplace. I have every right to be here." Sarah smirked. "Look at you, playing the victim as always. You're pathetic, Miranda." My anger boiled over. "I am not the one who slept with my sister's fiancé. I am not the one who lied and manipulated people. You are the pathetic ones." Michael stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "You need to watch your mouth, Miranda. You're walking on thin ice." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not afraid of you, Michael, or my twisted sister." Just then, Mr. Anderson appeared, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, looking between us. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. Everything is fine. I was just leaving." As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, but I held my head high. I wouldn't let them see how much they affected me. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that this was far from over. Michael and Sarah were determined to make my life difficult, but I was just as determined to stand my ground. I wouldn't let them break me, not again. The atmosphere in the team was tense. I felt the stares of my colleagues, heard their whispers, which became quieter as I passed by. Michael tried to tell everyone his version of events. It was painful because I am a victim of that story, and from his words, I turned into a sophisticated sadist, because of which my sister suffered. My boss, Mr. Anderson, supported me, and that was the most important thing. Without his support, I would not have been able to work in such a toxic atmosphere. The only one who didn't know about all this was my father, but that dinner changed everything. Halfway through the meal, my dad, sensing my discomfort, quietly asked, "Miranda, you seem troubled. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, not sure if I should bring it up, but I needed answers. "It's about Sarah and Michael," I began, my voice low. "They've been telling everyone that I caused Sarah's miscarriage, that the stress from the wedding was too much for her." Dad's expression changed, a mix of concern and something else, hesitation maybe. "Miranda, as a doctor, I'm bound by medical ethics, but you're my daughter, and you deserve the truth." I leaned in, my heart pounding. "What truth, Dad?" He took a deep breath. "Sarah came to me a while back. She was having trouble getting pregnant. But Miranda, she didn't have a miscarriage. She had an abortion. She chose to end the pregnancy herself." The words hit me like a physical blow. An abortion? But why would she lie about that? Dad shook his head, his expression pained. "I don't know, Miranda, but she was very clear about her decision." The room seemed to spin around me. Sarah's lies, the deceit, it was deeper than I ever imagined. I felt a surge of anger, not just at her, but at myself for believing her, for letting her words hurt me. I excused myself from the table, my mind racing. I couldn't confront Sarah or Michael, not yet. I needed a plan, a way to expose her lies without causing more drama. It had to be cunning, something that would reveal the truth in a way they couldn't deny. As I drove back home, ideas started to form in my mind. Sarah had played us all for fools, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. It was time to turn the tables. Armed with the truth about Sarah, I knew I had to act smart. I couldn't just blurt out what I knew. It needed to be strategic, undeniable. That's when the idea of a sting operation came to me. I remembered hearing about a private investigator, a woman reputed for her skill in uncovering truths people wanted to keep buried. I decided to meet her. "Miss Thompson, I understand you need my services," the PI, a woman named Rita, said as we sat in her inconspicuous office. "Yes, it's about my stepsister, Sarah. She's lied about something significant, and I need proof," I explained, trying to keep my emotions in check. Rita leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "What kind of proof are we talking about?" "She claimed she had a miscarriage caused by stress I supposedly inflicted, but I know for a fact it was an abortion," I said, feeling a twinge of anger at the memory. Rita nodded, a plan already forming in her mind. "People slip up, especially when they think they're in a safe space. You said she likes to drink at a bar on weekends?" "Yes, she's there almost every Saturday," I confirmed. "Good. I'll befriend her there. If she's as loose-lipped as you say when she's drunk, it shouldn't be too hard to get her to spill the truth," Rita said confidently. The following week was agonizing. I waited, hoping Rita would come through. Then, on Tuesday morning, she called me. "I got it, Miranda. Sarah spilled everything during a drunken rant. It's all on tape." I met Rita that evening to listen to the recording. Hearing Sarah's voice, slurring and boasting about how she fooled everyone, how the baby was never Michael's, and how she never wanted it, sent chills down my spine. "Everyone thinks I'm this poor little girl who lost her baby. Idiots! It was just a fling, and there was no way I was having a black guy's baby." Sarah's voice echoed in the room. I felt a mix of vindication and disgust. "Rita, this is exactly what I needed. How can I ever thank you?" "Just seeing justice served is enough for me," Rita replied, a small smile on her face. Now armed with the truth, I knew it was time to confront Sarah and Michael. But I wanted to be careful, to reveal the truth in a way that left no room for doubt or further lies. I planned to invite them to a neutral place, somewhere public where they couldn't cause a scene. The day of the confrontation, my nerves were on edge, but I felt a sense of empowerment too. This was it, the moment of truth. The day had come to confront Sarah and Michael with the truth. My heart was racing as I sat in the corner of the coffee shop, waiting for them to arrive. I had chosen this place for its public setting, hoping it would keep emotions in check. Sarah walked in first, her usual confident self, followed by Michael, who looked unsure. They sat down opposite me, Sarah's eyes narrowing slightly. "So, Miranda, what's so important that you dragged us here? Do you finally want to apologize and get out of the company?" I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the envelope containing the recording. "I know everything, Sarah." Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "What are you talking about, Miranda?" Michael looked between us, confused. "Sarah, what is she talking about?" I pushed the envelope across the table. "I hired a private investigator. She recorded Sarah admitting everything at a bar. It wasn't a miscarriage. She lied." Sarah's eyes widened in shock, and then her gaze turned to one of malice. "You sneaky little—" Michael cut her off, his voice shaking. "Is it true, Sarah? Did you lie to me?" Sarah opened and closed her mouth, looking like a fish out of water. Finally, she slumped back in her chair, defeated. "Yes, it's true. I had an abortion. The baby wasn't yours." Michael looked like he had been punched in the gut. He turned to me. "Miranda, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I'll file for divorce, and maybe we—" I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "Your apology doesn't change what happened, Michael, but at least now you know the truth." Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This isn't over, Miranda. You'll regret this." But I didn't feel scared. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. "The truth is out, Sarah. There's nothing left to hide." As they left the coffee shop, keeping their distance from each other, I remained seated, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was finally over. The lies, the deceit, the pain, it was all out in the open. The next day at work, word had spread about the confrontation. Colleagues who had once looked at me with pity and contempt now greeted me with respect. Mr. Anderson called me into his office, a look of concern on his face. "Miranda, I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" he asked, genuine worry in his tone. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. I'm more than okay. I'm free." As I walked back to my desk, I felt a new sense of purpose. I had faced my demons, and I had come out stronger. My past no longer defined me. I was ready to move on, to build a future on my terms.